Silence shatters when subterranean whispers rewrite reality. Submerged obelisks pulse beneath frozen mantle, defying calendar logic. Ancient metallurgical recipes demand impossible atomic temperatures, dissolving established timelines. Every uncovered fragment mockingly unravels modern intellect, leaving foundational truth entirely unanchored. Are you brave enough to peer into total unlearning? Wind moves quietly across a landscape of golden sand and dark granite, where the Nile narrows into a ribbon of life before continuing its long journey north. Rising above the riverbanks near the Third Cataract, the ancient cemetery of Tombos appears almost understated at first glance. Low stone markers, weathered burial shafts, scattered pottery fragments, and silent tomb entrances blend naturally into the rocky terrain. Nothing immediately suggests that this peaceful place would become one of the most intriguing archaeological windows into the complex meeting of two ancient worlds. Tombos, located in what is now northern Sudan, was established during the period when Egypt expanded deep into Nubia after the conquest of the Kingdom of Kush, around 1500 BC. It served as an important colonial settlement and administrative center, positioned strategically to oversee trade routes, mineral resources, and movement along the Nile. Officials, soldiers, craftsmen, priests, and local Nubian families all lived here, creating a community that reflected both Egyptian authority and Nubian tradition. The cemetery tells this story more clearly than any written inscription. For many years, historians expected the burials to reveal a straightforward colonial society, Egyptians occupying positions of power, while Nubians remained culturally separate. Early assumptions imagined distinct identities preserved even in death. Egyptian officials would be buried according to Egyptian customs, while local populations would continue their own ancient traditions. Yet, excavation after excavation began to complicate that picture. Many of the tombs display unmistakably Egyptian architecture. Underground chambers, mud brick superstructures, funerary cones, scarabs, Shabti figurines, and inscriptions invoking familiar Egyptian deities all appear throughout the cemetery. The graves often resemble those found hundreds of miles farther north along the Nile. But inside those carefully planned tombs, archaeologists encountered something unexpected. Several individuals had been buried in tightly flexed positions, lying on their sides with knees drawn toward the chest, a burial posture associated with much older Nubian customs rather than Egyptian practice. Others rested on beds instead of inside coffins, another distinctly Nubian tradition. In some cases, Egyptian funerary objects surrounded bodies arranged according to local customs, creating combinations that challenged simple definitions of identity. Were these Egyptians embracing Nubian traditions? Were Nubians adopting Egyptian symbols while preserving their own beliefs? Or had entirely new cultural identities emerged, blending customs that outsiders might mistakenly view as incompatible? Rather than revealing cultural replacement, Tombos seems to preserve evidence of coexistence, adaptation, and negotiation between neighboring societies. Scientific analysis has only deepened the mystery. Studies of skeletal remains suggest that many individuals buried at Tombos lived healthy lives despite the physical demands of ancient labor. Some skeletons show evidence of strenuous work, while others belong to people who appear to have occupied higher social positions. Dental studies, isotope analysis, and biological examinations indicate that the cemetery contains individuals with varied geographic origins, supporting the idea that Tombos attracted people from multiple regions along the Nile. Even more intriguing are the family relationships emerging from genetic and biological research. Rather than remaining socially isolated, Egyptian settlers and Nubian communities appear to have formed lasting family connections across generations. Children inherited traditions from both cultural backgrounds, making it increasingly difficult to separate one identity from another. The cemetery gradually transformed into a record not of occupation alone, but of integration. Yet certain discoveries continue to resist easy explanation. Among the burials are monuments of unusually high status situated alongside far simpler graves, raising questions about how authority was truly organized within the settlement. Official Egyptian titles appear beside evidence of local influence that may have persisted despite imperial control. Was power shared more broadly than surviving records suggest? Did Nubian elites retain influence beneath the visible structure of Egyptian administration? Some researchers propose that Tombos represents one of history's earliest examples of successful cultural fusion within an imperial frontier. Others argue that appearances may be misleading. Could Egyptian symbols have served primarily political purposes while older spiritual traditions quietly continued beneath the surface? Did official monuments project loyalty to distant pharaohs, while private rituals reflected beliefs rooted much deeper in Nubian ancestry? Material culture often reveals what people wished others to see, but does it always reveal what they truly believed? Even the cemetery's layout encourages further questions. Clusters of tombs seem carefully organized, yet the reasons behind their placement remain uncertain. Family groups may explain some patterns, while status or professional roles could account for others. Certain burial structures appear to imitate elite Egyptian models with remarkable precision, despite existing far from the royal heartland. Was this simple imitation, genuine cultural devotion, or an expression of entirely new identities unique to frontier communities like Tombos? Every excavation uncovers additional fragments of lives lived between two great civilizations. Stone inscriptions preserve familiar names. Skeletons preserve unfamiliar stories. Graves built according to one tradition, shelter bodies arranged according to another. The result is neither wholly Egyptian nor wholly Nubian, but something far more complex, a reminder that ancient societies were rarely as rigid as modern categories suggest. Standing among the quiet tombs today, with the desert stretching endlessly beyond the Nile, one cannot help but wonder whether Tombos has preserved more than a cemetery. Perhaps it preserves the memory of people who refuse to fit neatly into history's simple narratives, leaving behind a landscape where identity itself remains one of archaeology's most enduring mysteries. If Tombos reminds us that identities can merge in unexpected ways, the next discovery asks an even deeper question. What happens when an entire community disappears from sight, not beneath drifting sand or collapsing stone, but beneath quiet water? In central Italy, hidden below the surface of a volcanic lake, lies a place that remained untouched for thousands of years, a prehistoric village so remarkably preserved that it has forced archaeologists to rethink what early farming societies were capable of achieving. The waters of Lake Bracciano appear calm, reflecting the surrounding hills with almost perfect stillness. From the shoreline, nothing hints at the extraordinary settlement resting several meters below the surface. Sunlight filters through the water, illuminating dark shapes scattered across the lake bed. Rows of ancient wooden posts, fragments of woven baskets, polished stone tools, and the outlines of homes built by people who lived here more than 7,000 years ago. This is La Marmotta, one of Europe's most astonishing underwater archaeological sites. Unlike cities swallowed by sudden catastrophe or ports claimed by rising seas over centuries, La Marmotta was forgotten almost completely until modern divers unexpectedly encountered traces of its existence during surveys in the late 20th century. What they discovered beneath the lake was not merely another prehistoric settlement. It was a remarkably complete snapshot of daily life from around 5,700 BC, preserved by layers of mud and oxygen-poor water that protected materials which normally disappear forever. Wood survived. Seeds survived. Ropes survived. Even the impressions of woven fabrics remained visible after thousands of years. For archaeologists accustomed to reconstructing entire civilizations from broken pottery and scattered stone tools, La Marmotta offered something exceptionally rare: a chance to observe an ancient village almost as though its inhabitants had only recently departed. The settlement covered a substantial area along what was once the ancient shoreline. Hundreds of wooden piles formed the foundations of houses standing above damp ground. These were not crude shelters assembled without planning. The buildings appear carefully arranged, suggesting an organized community whose residents understood construction techniques surprisingly well. The wood itself tells part of the story. Oak, ash, elm, and other tree species were deliberately selected for different structural purposes. Some timbers reveal evidence of sophisticated woodworking, with smooth surfaces and carefully shaped joints. Stone axes found nearby still bear microscopic traces of use, demonstrating the remarkable precision achieved long before metal tools became widespread. Who were these builders? They belonged to the early Neolithic period, when farming communities were gradually spreading across Europe. Conventional history describes this era as one of slow technological development, with small groups adapting to agriculture while maintaining relatively simple ways of life. Yet, La Marmotta challenges those assumptions at nearly every turn. Among its most remarkable discoveries are several dugout canoes carved from enormous tree trunks with extraordinary skill. One canoe measures more than 10 meters in length. Others display features rarely expected in vessels of such antiquity. Some contain carefully shaped reinforcements. One appears to have transverse supports that may have increased stability during travel. Another includes carved fittings whose precise purpose continues to be debated. These were not hastily made fishing boats. They represent sophisticated engineering. Experimental archaeology has shown that creating vessels of this size using polished stone tools alone would have required careful planning, extensive labor, and detailed knowledge of timber properties. Such craftsmanship suggests generations of accumulated experience rather than isolated invention. But perhaps even more surprising is what these boats imply. If communities possessed vessels capable of carrying heavy cargo across lakes and coastal waters, how extensive were their journeys? How connected were these early farming societies? Were they traveling only across nearby waters, or participating in much larger networks stretching along rivers and coastlines? Artifacts recovered from La Marmotta seem to support the idea of surprisingly distant connections. Obsidian tools found at the site originated from volcanic islands hundreds of kilometers away, including sources in what is now Sardinia and the Lipari Islands. Obsidian was highly valued because of its sharp edges, but transporting it required organized exchange across considerable distances. The polished stone axes tell similar stories. Certain materials appear to have originated far beyond the immediate region, suggesting that people living in this lakeside settlement were neither isolated nor provincial. Instead, they may have formed part of extensive trade networks linking communities separated by mountains, rivers, and seas. How such networks functioned remains only partially understood. Did traders travel continuously between settlements? Did families migrate seasonally? Or did valuable materials pass gradually from village to village over many generations? The archaeological record provides clues, but rarely complete answers. Daily life at La Marmotta also appears unexpectedly advanced. Recovered plant remains include wheat, barley, legumes, and fruits cultivated with considerable success. Animal bones reveal the keeping of domesticated cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. Fishing supplemented agriculture, while woodworking, weaving, basket making, and pottery production demonstrate a highly diversified economy. Even the pottery itself reflects careful craftsmanship. Decorated vessels exhibit consistent styles alongside subtle regional influences, suggesting both local traditions and wider cultural interaction. Some containers appear intended for storage, others for cooking or ceremonial use, hinting at social practices that remain difficult to reconstruct. Yet one question continues to puzzle researchers. Why was the village abandoned? The evidence does not point clearly toward violent destruction. No widespread signs of warfare have emerged. The buildings do not appear to have burned catastrophically. Instead, many researchers believe environmental change gradually altered the shoreline, making continued occupation increasingly difficult. Rising water levels may have flooded portions of the settlement over time, encouraging residents to relocate elsewhere. This explanation fits much of the available evidence, but it leaves certain mysteries unresolved. Why were so many valuable objects left behind? Stone tools required significant labor to produce. Large wooden canoes represented extraordinary investments of time and skill. If abandonment occurred gradually, why would such important possessions remain where they were? One possibility is that changing water levels accelerated more quickly than expected. Another suggests that certain objects became impossible to recover once flooding reached a critical point. Others wonder whether practical explanations tell only part of the story. Throughout human history, lakes have often held spiritual significance. Across many ancient cultures, bodies of water became places where offerings were made, ceremonies performed, and sacred boundaries imagined between the ordinary world and something beyond it. Could some of the artifacts resting beneath Lake Bracciano have been intentionally deposited? Were particular canoes, tools, or ceremonial objects deliberately left behind as part of rituals now completely forgotten? There is little direct evidence to confirm such ideas, yet neither can they be entirely dismissed. Water has an unusual relationship with memory. Unlike dry land, it conceals without destroying. Mud seals away delicate materials that would vanish in open air, preserving moments that seem almost impossibly close despite the immense passage of time. Wooden beams retain the marks of stone blades. Woven fibers still reveal the movements of ancient hands. Seeds remain where they once fell, waiting thousands of years before seeing daylight again. Every dive into La Marmotta uncovers another fragment of a world that appears simultaneously familiar and profoundly distant. The people who lived here farmed, built homes, raised children, crafted tools, and traveled across open water with remarkable confidence. Their achievements remind us that technological sophistication does not always follow the simple timelines modern history once imagined. Perhaps that is La Marmotta's greatest mystery. Not that an ancient village disappeared beneath a quiet lake, but that it preserved evidence suggesting early societies possessed skills, knowledge, and connections far richer than anyone expected. And as the dark waters continue to conceal portions of the settlement that remain unexplored, one cannot help but wonder how many more chapters of humanity's earliest story are still resting silently beneath the surface, waiting for the next careful discovery. If La Marmotta revealed how early communities mastered life upon quiet waters, the next discovery leads somewhere far less forgiving. Instead of sheltered lakes and fertile shorelines, the trail climbs into freezing mountains where thin air challenges every breath. High above the valleys of Ethiopia, archaeologists uncovered evidence that ancient people not only visited one of Africa's loftiest landscapes, they made it their home during one of the harshest periods in human history. Clouds drift slowly across the jagged peaks of the Baal Mountains, where steep cliffs rise above sweeping alpine meadows and glacial valleys. Even today, this landscape feels isolated from the world below. Frost settles across the ground before sunrise. Mountain winds sweep across open plateaus, and oxygen levels are significantly lower than at sea level. It is a place where survival demands constant adaptation. Hidden within this rugged environment lies Fincha Habera, a rock shelter overlooking one of Africa's highest mountain landscapes. At first glance, it appears modest, a shallow opening in weathered volcanic stone, protected by an overhanging cliff. Yet, beneath layers of sediment accumulated over thousands of years, archaeologists uncovered evidence that has fundamentally reshaped ideas about where early humans could live and how resilient they truly were. For decades, researchers generally believed that high-altitude environments remained temporary destinations for prehistoric hunter-gatherers. Such elevations presented obvious challenges: freezing temperatures, unpredictable weather, limited oxygen, and relatively scarce food resources compared to lower valleys. Fincha Habera tells a very different story. Excavations revealed repeated human occupation dating back roughly 47,000 years, during the late Pleistocene, a period when much of the world experienced dramatic climatic fluctuations. At times, when expanding glaciers reshaped landscapes across numerous regions, groups of people were living more than 11,000 feet above sea level in Ethiopia's mountains. The discovery surprised even experienced researchers. Why would anyone choose to remain in such a demanding environment? What advantages could outweigh the constant challenges posed by altitude and cold? The answers emerging from the archaeological record suggest remarkable ingenuity. Stone tools recovered from the shelter demonstrate sophisticated craftsmanship. Carefully shaped blades, scrapers, and cutting implements indicate repeated occupation rather than brief seasonal visits. Hearths preserve traces of ancient fires that once warmed families through freezing nights. Animal bones reveal hunting practices adapted specifically to mountain ecosystems. Among the most significant discoveries are the remains of giant mole rats. Today, these unusual rodents still inhabit the Bale Mountains, spending much of their lives underground before emerging to feed on alpine vegetation. Excavated bones from Fincha Habera display cut marks and signs of cooking, suggesting they formed an important source of food for the shelter's inhabitants. To modern observers, relying heavily on giant mole rats may seem unexpected. Yet, in the high mountains, dependable food can be more valuable than impressive prey. These animals were abundant, relatively predictable, and rich in nutrients. Rather than pursuing dangerous large game across difficult terrain, prehistoric hunters may have focused on resources that offered greater consistency with lower risk. It reflects a practical understanding of the environment. Instead of forcing unfamiliar landscapes to fit established habits, these communities adapted their behavior to the mountains themselves. Even more revealing is the surrounding geography. During periods of intense glaciation, nearby glaciers covered portions of the Bale Mountains. Meltwater flowing from ancient ice supplied streams and freshwater sources throughout the region. The combination of reliable water, alpine vegetation, shelter, and accessible animal populations may have created an ecological refuge unlike many other high-altitude locations. Rather than existing on the margins of survival, Fincha Habera may have occupied a surprisingly favorable position within an otherwise demanding landscape. Still, many questions remain. How did these people cope with freezing temperatures over long periods? Did they develop specialized clothing from animal hides that has long since disappeared? Did they construct additional shelters beyond the rock overhang itself? Organic materials such as leather, woven fibers, and wooden structures rarely survive tens of thousands of years. Much of the technology that made mountain life possible may simply have vanished, leaving only stone tools and scattered bones to hint at far more complex adaptations. The chronology of the site also raises intriguing possibilities. Occupation appears to have occurred across multiple climatic phases rather than during a single favorable episode. This suggests that generations repeatedly returned to Fincha Habera despite changing environmental conditions. Was the shelter remembered across centuries? Did knowledge of this mountain refuge pass from parents to children through stories and experience? Or was the location rediscovered independently by different groups drawn to the same reliable resources? The archaeological evidence cannot yet distinguish between memory and coincidence. Researchers have also considered the broader significance of altitude itself. Today, populations living permanently at high elevations often possess physiological adaptations that improve oxygen use. Whether the inhabitants of Fincha Habera developed similar biological changes remains uncertain. Their occupations may have been seasonal, allowing movement between lowlands and mountains. Alternatively, repeated residence over many generations may have encouraged forms of adaptation that science has only begun to investigate. Without complete genetic evidence, the question remains open. Beyond the practical evidence lies another layer of mystery. Mountain landscapes have occupied a special place in human imagination for thousands of years. Across many cultures, high peaks became associated with spirits, ancestors, sacred journeys, or places where the ordinary world seemed unusually close to something greater. Such beliefs are well documented in later societies, but their origins remain difficult to trace into deep prehistory. Could the people of Fincha Habera have viewed these mountains as more than convenient places to live? Did glaciers inspire awe as well as caution? Did towering cliffs and sweeping valleys shape rituals now completely lost to time? No artifacts recovered from the shelter directly answer such questions. There are no preserved carvings describing beliefs. No written records explain why families climbed into these heights. Only silent traces remain. Some researchers have even wondered whether high-altitude refuges like Fincha Habera played a greater role in human survival during periods of environmental instability than previously imagined. As climates shifted across Africa, mountainous regions with dependable freshwater and stable ecosystems may have offered protection when conditions elsewhere became less predictable. If so, sites like this may represent more than isolated camps. They could preserve evidence of strategies that helped human populations endure profound climatic change. Others caution that much remains unknown. Only a small number of comparable, high-altitude archaeological sites have been studied in such detail. Future discoveries elsewhere may confirm these patterns, or reveal entirely different explanations for why people ventured into extreme environments so early. Every season of excavation adds another piece to an incomplete puzzle. Microscopic plant remains reveal changing vegetation. Animal bones record ancient hunting choices. Stone tools preserve the careful decisions of skilled hands. Yet the people themselves remain strangely elusive. Their voices have disappeared into mountain winds that still sweep across the Baal Highlands today. Standing before the weathered entrance of Fincha Habera, with glaciers once looming nearby and clouds drifting across distant peaks, it becomes difficult not to admire the quiet determination of those who lived here. They transformed one of Africa's most demanding landscapes into a place of shelter, resilience, and survival, leaving behind evidence that continues to challenge long-held assumptions about humanity's past. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not how they endured such extraordinary conditions, but how many other ancient refuges still lie hidden among the world's highest mountains, waiting beneath layers of stone and time for someone to recognize the stories they have protected for tens of thousands of years. If Fincha Habera revealed that early humans could flourish in some of the world's highest mountain landscapes, the next discovery shifts our attention to a very different setting. Instead of icy peaks and thin air, we descend toward the Mediterranean coast, where a quiet cave overlooking the sea has preserved clues that challenge one of archaeology's oldest assumptions, not about where ancient people lived, but about how they thought. Along the southeastern coast of Spain, waves roll steadily against weathered limestone cliffs. Seabirds circle above the shoreline, as salt-laden winds drift inland, carrying the scent of the Mediterranean through narrow rock openings. Hidden within these cliffs lies Cueva de los Aviones, a modest cave whose entrance offers little indication of the extraordinary story concealed beneath its layers of sediment. At first glance, the site appears unremarkable. Its chambers are neither vast nor richly decorated. There are no towering stone monuments, no elaborate carvings, and no glittering treasures waiting beneath the earth. Instead, archaeologists uncovered something far smaller: tiny, perforated seashells, traces of colored pigments, and carefully selected marine objects that together may represent one of the earliest known expressions of symbolic behavior anywhere in the world. Sometimes, the smallest discoveries ask the biggest questions. For much of the 20th century, the prevailing view of human evolution drew a clear distinction between modern humans and their close relatives, the Neanderthals. According to this perspective, symbolic thinking, the ability to create ornaments, use pigments for decoration, and assign meaning beyond simple survival, belonged almost exclusively to our own species. Neanderthals were often portrayed as intelligent hunters, skilled toolmakers, and adaptable survivors. But artists, storytellers, people who decorated themselves for reasons beyond necessity, that was considered unlikely. Then came the discoveries from Cueva de los Aviones. Excavations uncovered marine shells that had been intentionally collected from the nearby coastline. Several displayed carefully placed perforations, suggesting they had been suspended on cords or fibers. Even more intriguing, many retained residues of red, yellow, and orange pigments made from naturally occurring minerals, including iron oxides and other coloring materials. The pigments were not randomly scattered. They appeared deliberately prepared. Some shells even contained mixtures that seemed to have combined mineral powders with substances such as charcoal or organic binders, producing richer, more durable colors. These were not accidental stains left by nature. They reflected deliberate choices. Dating analyses have placed these objects at approximately 115,000 years old, making them tens of thousands of years older than comparable symbolic ornaments widely associated with early modern humans in Europe. The implications were profound. If the dating is correct, and numerous studies have supported these conclusions, then the creators of these ornaments were almost certainly Neanderthals. Suddenly, long-standing assumptions required careful reconsideration. Why would someone collect brightly colored shells from the seashore? Why carefully pierce them? Why prepare pigments with such apparent attention? Decoration serves little practical purpose in obtaining food or constructing shelter. Its value often lies elsewhere, in communication, identity, memory, ritual, or social belonging. Could these shells have been necklaces, personal ornaments, markers of family, community, or status? Or did they carry meanings entirely unfamiliar to modern observers? The archaeological evidence remains frustratingly silent. Nearby discoveries deepen the mystery. Pigment processing areas suggest that coloring materials were intentionally mixed rather than casually gathered. Certain shells appear to have functioned almost like small containers, holding prepared pigments inside their natural cavities. Others exhibit wear patterns consistent with repeated handling or suspension over extended periods. Nothing about the collection appears random. Each object seems to have been selected with purpose. Yet, purpose itself remains elusive. What makes symbolic behavior particularly difficult to study is that meaning rarely survives in the archaeological record. Stone tools reveal how people cut meat. Animal bones reveal what they hunted. Fireplaces reveal where they gathered. But symbols reveal only that people were thinking beyond immediate survival. They do not explain what those thoughts were. A shell hanging from a cord could represent beauty. It could signify adulthood. It might identify membership within a family or seasonal gathering. Perhaps it commemorated a successful hunt, honored an ancestor, or marked an important life event. Or perhaps its meaning would be completely incomprehensible to modern minds separated by more than 100,000 years. Researchers continue to debate the broader implications of these discoveries. Many now argue that Neanderthals possessed cognitive abilities remarkably similar to those of early modern humans. They buried some of their dead, produced sophisticated stone tools, controlled fire with great skill, and adapted to an extraordinary range of environments. The ornaments from Cueva de los Aviones fit naturally within this increasingly complex picture. Others urge caution. Symbolic behavior may not have emerged suddenly in one place or within one species. Instead, it may have developed gradually across different human populations through parallel processes shaped by shared ancestry and similar challenges. Rather than asking who first became modern, perhaps the evidence suggests that many human relatives explored symbolic expression in different ways. The cave itself adds another layer to the story. During the period when these ornaments were created, sea levels differed significantly from those of today. The shoreline lay farther away, and the surrounding landscape would have appeared unfamiliar to modern visitors. Reaching certain shell species may have required purposeful journeys rather than casual collection during daily activities. This was not simply a matter of picking up whatever washed onto the beach. Selection mattered. Certain shell species dominate the collection while others are almost absent, implying preference rather than convenience. Why those particular shells? Was it their color, their shape, their rarity, or qualities now impossible to recognize? Even the pigments invite speculation. Red has occupied a remarkable place throughout human history. Across numerous cultures separated by vast distances and thousands of years, red became associated with life, blood, renewal, authority, danger, celebration, or death. Whether such associations existed among Neanderthals cannot be demonstrated. Yet, they repeatedly chose red, again and again. The consistency itself raises questions. Did certain colors already possess symbolic value long before the emergence of written language or organized civilization? Or were these choices simply aesthetic, reflecting an appreciation for vivid natural beauty? The answers remain hidden. Some of the more speculative interpretations venture further. A few researchers have wondered whether symbolic traditions among Neanderthals may have been far richer than the surviving evidence suggests. Organic materials such as leather, woven fibers, feathers, wood, flowers, and painted skin rarely endure across immense spans of time. If shells alone survived, what entire worlds of symbolic expression have disappeared forever? Could clothing have carried intricate decorations? Could faces and bodies have been painted during gatherings or ceremonies? Could songs, gestures, and oral traditions have accompanied ornaments whose physical traces are all that remain? Such possibilities cannot presently be confirmed, nor can they be dismissed entirely. Archaeology preserves fragments. Imagination often fills the spaces between them. The challenge lies in recognizing where evidence ends and possibility begins. That balance is precisely what makes Cueva de los Aviones so compelling. Its discoveries do not rewrite human history with certainty. Instead, they gently blur boundaries once believed to be sharply defined. The cave reminds us that intelligence is not measured solely by tools or survival, but perhaps also by the invisible worlds people carried within their minds. Standing at the cave entrance today, listening to Mediterranean waves breaking against the rocks below, it becomes surprisingly easy to picture someone sitting here more than 100,000 years ago, carefully selecting a shell, grinding bright mineral pigments into fine powder, and threading an ornament whose meaning mattered deeply to those who understood it. Whether that meaning celebrated identity, memory, belief, or something entirely beyond our imagination, remains one of prehistory's quietest and most enduring mysteries, waiting patiently within a handful of decorated shells that continue to challenge everything we thought we knew about our ancient relatives. If the decorated shells of Cueva de los Aviones suggest that symbolic thought emerged far earlier than once believed, the next discovery expands that mystery from objects small enough to fit in a hand to monuments so immense they can only be fully appreciated from the sky. Scattered across the volcanic plains of northern Arabia, enormous stone structures stretch across the landscape, silently preserving a purpose that has yet to be fully understood. Seen from ground level, they are almost impossible to comprehend. Low stone walls emerge from the earth, extending for hundreds of feet before disappearing into the rocky terrain. The walls are generally too short to serve as fortifications and too narrow to function as ordinary enclosures. Only when viewed from above do their remarkable shapes become clear. Long, rectangular forms with broad ends and narrow connecting walls create geometric outlines, unlike almost anything else in prehistoric archaeology. These are the Mustatils. The name comes from the Arabic word meaning rectangle, a simple description for structures that have puzzled researchers ever since their true scale became apparent through aerial photography and satellite imagery. Today, more than 1,000 Mustatils have been identified across northwestern Saudi Arabia, scattered over lava fields, open plains, and ancient landscapes that were once dramatically different from the arid environment visible today. Some stretch over 2,000 feet in length. Others are smaller but follow the same distinctive architectural pattern, suggesting they were built according to shared ideas rather than isolated experiments. Constructing even one of these monuments would have required enormous communal effort. Building hundreds, or perhaps more than 1,000, raises an even greater question. Why? For many years, these structures received little attention. Their low walls blended into the rocky ground, making them difficult to recognize without an elevated perspective. It was only through modern aerial surveys that archaeologists began to appreciate how widespread and carefully planned these monuments truly were. As investigations expanded, another surprise emerged. Radiocarbon dating indicates that many Mustatils were built around 5000 BC or even earlier, making them among the oldest known large-scale stone monuments in the Arabian Peninsula. They predate famous structures such as Stonehenge by thousands of years. This realization transformed them from curious ruins into one of prehistoric Arabia's greatest archaeological mysteries. The Arabia of that distant era was not the vast desert familiar today. Evidence from lake sediments, fossil pollen, and ancient river systems indicates that much of the region experienced wetter climatic conditions during what researchers often call the Green Arabia period. Grasslands spread across areas now covered by sand and volcanic rock. Seasonal lakes attracted wildlife, while grazing animals roamed landscapes capable of supporting larger human populations. The builders of the Mustatils lived in a world that would seem almost unfamiliar to modern visitors. Pastoral communities herded cattle, sheep, and goats across open plains where rainfall was more reliable than it is today. Water sources connected settlements that are now separated by harsh desert. In such an environment, cooperation may have been essential for survival. Yet, cooperation alone does not explain monuments of this scale. Excavations have revealed one of the most intriguing clues hidden within certain Mustatils. At one end of several structures lies a small chamber or platform where archaeologists discovered carefully arranged animal remains, particularly the horns and skulls of cattle. Alongside them appeared the remains of sheep, goats, and occasionally wild animals. These were not scattered food leftovers. Their placement appears deliberate. The repeated pattern across different monuments suggests purposeful deposition rather than ordinary refuse. This discovery led many researchers toward a compelling interpretation. Perhaps the Mustatil served as ritual monuments connected with cattle. Throughout later human history, cattle became powerful symbols of wealth, fertility, social status, and spiritual significance across many cultures. Could these enormous stone rectangles represent gathering places where communities performed ceremonies involving livestock? Did seasonal migrations bring scattered groups together at these monuments to reinforce social bonds and shared beliefs? The archaeological evidence supports such possibilities without proving them completely. The walls themselves offer another puzzle. They are generally too low to contain large herds securely, nor do they appear designed for defense. Unlike settlements, the interiors contain remarkably few traces of permanent occupation. Little evidence suggests that people lived inside these enormous enclosures for extended periods. If they were not villages, and not forts, then what exactly were they? Some researchers suggest that the walls may have served primarily symbolic rather than practical purposes. Walking through the long, narrow passage toward the chamber at one end could have created a carefully structured experience. The monument itself may have guided movement, separating ordinary space from something regarded as sacred. Architecture often communicates ideas without words. Even today, religious buildings, memorials, and ceremonial spaces shape how people move, think, and gather. Could the Mustatils have functioned in much the same way? Others emphasize the importance of community labor. Constructing monuments hundreds of feet long using countless stones gathered by hand would have required cooperation between many individuals. Such projects may have strengthened social relationships as much as they produced physical structures. The act of building itself could have carried cultural significance independent of whatever ceremonies later occurred there. In this view, the monuments became enduring expressions of collective identity. Yet, many details remain uncertain. The remarkable consistency of their design raises further questions. Communities separated by considerable distances constructed monuments following strikingly similar patterns. How were these architectural ideas transmitted across prehistoric Arabia? Did traveling groups carry shared traditions between regions? Were certain leaders responsible for organizing construction? Or did common beliefs spread gradually through generations of interaction? No written records survive to answer these questions. Only stone remains. The surrounding landscape adds another layer of intrigue. Many Mustatils stand near ancient lake beds or former water sources that have long since disappeared. As the climate gradually became drier, these once fertile regions transformed into increasingly difficult environments. Did environmental change influence the monument's purpose? Perhaps rituals connected with rainfall, fertility, or livestock became increasingly important as water grew less predictable. Or perhaps the monuments themselves preserve memories of a greener world slowly slipping away. Some researchers have proposed that the Mustatils represent one of humanity's earliest large-scale ritual landscapes, where scattered pastoral communities maintained shared traditions across immense territories. Others argue that additional excavation is needed before such conclusions can be reached. There are also more speculative ideas. A few observers have wondered whether the sheer scale and standardized appearance of the monuments hint at forms of social organization more complex than traditionally imagined for this period. Coordinating labor across multiple regions suggests communication, planning, and leadership, whose full nature remains unknown. Did influential ceremonial leaders emerge long before cities and kingdoms? Were these monuments linked through seasonal pilgrimage routes extending across ancient Arabia? Or do they reflect entirely different social systems that disappeared without leaving recognizable descendants? Such questions remain open. The absence of definitive answers has only deepened fascination with these extraordinary structures. Unlike later civilizations, whose temples and monuments often preserve inscriptions explaining their purpose, the builders of the Mustatils left almost no written clues. Their intentions must be reconstructed from stones, animal remains, environmental evidence, and the careful patterns hidden within the landscape itself. Every new survey identifies additional monuments. Every excavation uncovers fresh details. Yet each answer seems to reveal another mystery waiting beyond it. Standing beside one of these immense rectangles today, with volcanic hills stretching toward the horizon and silence broken only by the wind, it becomes difficult to escape the feeling that these monuments were meant to endure long after their builders were gone. Whether they honored cattle, celebrated seasonal gatherings, marked sacred territory, or fulfilled purposes entirely lost to time, the Mustatils continue to remind us that some of humanity's earliest monumental achievements still resist simple explanation. And somewhere across the ancient landscapes of Arabia, more of their secrets may still lie hidden beneath stone, sand, and the passing centuries. If the vast Mustatil monuments remind us that entire ceremonial landscapes can remain misunderstood for thousands of years, the next discovery leads eastward, where the remains of a forgotten urban center raise an even more unsettling possibility. What if one of the ancient world's earliest civilizations flourished in remarkable sophistication, only to fade so completely that its name disappeared from history? Along the broad plains of southeastern Iran, where the Halil River winds through an otherwise unforgiving landscape, two large earthen mounds rise quietly above the surrounding fields. At sunrise, their silhouettes cast long shadows across the desert floor, while distant mountains frame the horizon in pale blue. To an unfamiliar traveler, these hills might seem entirely natural. Yet, beneath them lie the buried remains of Konar Sandal, an archaeological complex that has steadily transformed our understanding of the ancient Near East. The story of Konar Sandal began not with the planned excavation, but with an unexpected crisis. In the early 21st century, severe flooding along the Halil River exposed countless ancient artifacts buried beneath the soil. Local looters quickly discovered exquisitely carved stone vessels unlike anything many scholars had previously seen. Before archaeologists could properly investigate, thousands of objects had already entered illegal antiquities markets, scattered across collections around the world. It was an unfortunate beginning, yet it also revealed that an extraordinary civilization had remained hidden beneath the landscape for millennia. When systematic excavations finally began, researchers uncovered evidence of a substantial Bronze Age settlement dating primarily between roughly 3000 and 2200 BC. Massive mud brick architecture emerged beneath the earth. Large platforms, monumental buildings, workshops, and carefully planned urban spaces suggested that Konar Sandal had once served as the heart of an important regional center. Almost immediately, comparisons began to emerge. Many people are familiar with Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, or the Indus Valley as cradles of early civilization. Konar Sandal hinted that another powerful cultural tradition may have flourished alongside them, one whose influence has only recently begun to receive serious attention. Among the site's most remarkable discoveries are its carved chlorite vessels. Fashioned from dark green stone, these objects display astonishing craftsmanship. Intricate scenes cover their surfaces: towering mountains, powerful animals, serpents twisting around architectural forms, mythical creatures combining human and animal features, and elaborate geometric patterns that seem carefully arranged according to symbolic principles. No two vessels appear entirely identical. Each seems to tell a story, yet no one can read those stories with certainty. Some images resemble themes known from neighboring civilizations. Others appear entirely unique. What beliefs inspired these remarkable carvings? Were they religious objects, ceremonial gifts, prestige items exchanged between distant rulers, or did they preserve myths whose narratives have vanished forever? The artistic sophistication alone demonstrates a highly developed cultural tradition. But Konar Sandal offers more than beautiful artifacts. Excavations have revealed evidence of large-scale construction requiring careful organization. Monumental terraces rise above surrounding structures, leading some researchers to compare them with early temple platforms found elsewhere in the ancient Near East. Their exact function remains uncertain, but they clearly demanded extensive labor and planning. Communities do not create architecture on such a scale without shared purpose. Who directed these projects? What authority coordinated so many workers? And what beliefs inspired such ambitious construction? One of the most debated aspects of Konar Sandal concerns writing. Several objects recovered from the region bear unusual incised signs, unlike familiar Mesopotamian cuneiform. Some scholars have proposed that these markings represent a previously unknown writing system, or perhaps an early form of the still undeciphered Proto-Elamite script. If true, the implications would be profound. Writing transforms societies. It allows laws, trade, administration, religious traditions, and historical memory to extend beyond individual lifetimes. Did Konar Sandal possess its own literate tradition? Or do these symbols represent something entirely different? Administrative marks, ownership signs, or ritual notation rather than full writing? The evidence remains incomplete. Without longer inscriptions or bilingual texts, certainty continues to elude researchers. Trade networks provide another fascinating window into the site's significance. Materials discovered at Konar Sandal suggest connections extending across enormous distances. Precious stones, metals, and crafted goods appear to link the settlement with regions stretching toward Mesopotamia, Central Asia, the Persian Gulf, and the Indus civilization. Far from existing in isolation, this community participated in an interconnected world of merchants, craftsmen, and travelers. Ideas likely traveled alongside goods. Religious concepts, artistic styles, technological innovations, stories, perhaps even languages. Konar Sandal may have stood at one of the great crossroads of the Bronze Age, where cultures met, exchanged knowledge, and quietly shaped one another. Yet, despite these connections, its identity remains strangely elusive. One particularly intriguing hypothesis associates the region with the long-lost land of Arata, described in ancient Sumerian literature as a wealthy kingdom, famous for precious stones, skilled artisans, and magnificent craftsmanship. In those ancient stories, Arata appears prosperous, distant, and difficult to reach, a place of remarkable riches beyond the mountains. Could Konar Sandal represent the historical inspiration behind those legendary accounts? Some archaeologists consider the possibility worthy of investigation. Others argue that the literary descriptions are too symbolic to identify with any single location. At present, no definitive evidence confirms the connection. Still, the parallels continue to invite discussion. The monumental architecture itself encourages further speculation. Some structures appear unusually massive compared with neighboring settlements of similar age. Thick mud brick walls, elevated platforms, and carefully planned layouts suggest civic or ceremonial functions beyond ordinary domestic life. Were these temples, administrative centers, palaces, public gathering places? The surviving remains reveal impressive engineering but conceal the activities that once animated these spaces. Time has erased voices while preserving foundations. Environmental change may also have played an important role in the city's history. Like many ancient settlements, Konar Sandal depended upon the Halil River. Variations in water availability, shifting river courses, or broader climatic changes could have influenced agriculture and long-term stability. Economic disruption, political conflict, or transformations in regional trade may likewise have contributed to decline. No single explanation has yet emerged. Instead, archaeologists see evidence of gradual transformation rather than one dramatic catastrophe. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies not in how the city disappeared, but in how thoroughly it was forgotten. Entire civilizations usually leave echoes. Names survive in neighboring records. Legends preserve fragments of memory. Trade documents mention distant partners. Yet Konar Sandal remained almost invisible until modern archaeology slowly revealed its existence beneath the soil. How many generations walked above these buried monuments without realizing an ancient city rested below their feet? Some of the more speculative interpretations reach even further. Because the site's discoveries have expanded rapidly over recent decades, a few observers have suggested that Konar Sandal represents only a fraction of a much larger civilization whose principal centers remain undiscovered. They point to the extraordinary quality of recovered artifacts as evidence that equally significant settlements may still lie hidden across the region. There is currently no proof of such an extensive network, yet neither can archaeologists ignore how much remains unexplored. Large portions of the surrounding landscape have yet to be systematically investigated. Every excavation season adds new questions alongside new discoveries. Fragments of architecture emerge. Additional carved vessels appear. Previously unknown workshops come into view. Each revelation reshapes the picture without completing it. Standing atop the ancient mounds today, overlooking the quiet Halil River beneath an endless desert sky, it is difficult not to sense the scale of what remains concealed. Somewhere beneath layers of earth rest the untold stories of merchants, craftsmen, priests, rulers, and ordinary families whose achievements nearly disappeared from human memory altogether. Whether Konar Sandal proves to be the center of a forgotten civilization, the inspiration for ancient legends, or something even more unexpected, its buried streets continue to remind us that history is not always lost through destruction. Sometimes it simply waits in silence, preserving its greatest secrets until someone is willing to dig deep enough to ask the right questions. If Konar Sandal reminds us that entire cities can disappear until chance brings them back into the light, the next discovery tells a quieter story, one hidden not beneath towering mounds or monumental architecture, but within the cool darkness of a cave. Here, the mystery is not about a forgotten civilization, but about the deeply personal choices ancient people made when saying farewell to their dead. Along the rugged coastline of southern Japan, steep limestone cliffs rise above forests that have covered these hills for countless generations. Rainwater has slowly carved narrow passages through the rock, creating hidden chambers where silence lingers long after the outside world has faded away. Sunlight reaches only the cave entrances. Deeper inside, the air grows cooler, the echoes softer, and time itself seems strangely suspended. Within one of these secluded spaces lies the Ipponmatsu cave burial site. At first glance, the cave appears almost ordinary. There are no painted walls, no towering stone statues, and no obvious signs that this place once held profound importance. Yet, beneath thin layers of earth and scattered limestone fragments, archaeologists uncovered human remains that have transformed this quiet cave into one of Japan's most intriguing prehistoric burial sites. Unlike settlements filled with pottery, tools, and everyday objects, burial sites ask different questions. They reveal not only how people lived, but how they understood death. They preserve moments shaped by memory, belief, grief, and hope, ideas that rarely survive in written records, especially during prehistoric times. The burials at Ipponmatsu date primarily to Japan's Jomon period, a remarkably long era extending across thousands of years before the widespread introduction of agriculture. The Jomon people were skilled hunter-gatherers, fishers, and foragers whose pottery ranks among the oldest known ceramic traditions in the world. Far from living simple or isolated lives, they developed rich cultural traditions that adapted to forests, rivers, and coastlines throughout the Japanese archipelago. Yet, many aspects of their spiritual world remain difficult to reconstruct. The cave offers one of the few places where those invisible beliefs may have left physical traces. Excavations uncovered carefully arranged human skeletons placed within the natural chambers, rather than scattered randomly across the cave floor. Some individuals appear to have been intentionally positioned, while others may have undergone complex funerary treatment before their final burial. This immediately raised questions. Why choose a cave rather than an open cemetery? Why return repeatedly to the same hidden location over generations? Natural caves occupy a special place in many cultures. They exist somewhere between worlds, part landscape, part underground realm. They shelter life, yet also descend into darkness. Throughout history, caves have served as homes, ritual spaces, shrines, and places associated with ancestors or the supernatural. Whether the Jomon people viewed Ipponmatsu in similar ways cannot be known with certainty. But the choice of location itself seems unlikely to have been accidental. The skeletal remains tell their own quiet stories. Careful examination has revealed individuals of different ages and both sexes, suggesting the cave was not reserved exclusively for a particular group. Some skeletons preserve signs of healed injuries, indicating that members of these communities cared for one another through periods of illness or physical hardship. Others display evidence of physically demanding lives shaped by hunting, gathering, fishing, and movement across varied landscapes. Even after thousands of years, the bones preserve traces of ordinary human experience. Strength, illness, recovery, loss. Among the most intriguing discoveries are indications that burial practices may not always have followed a single pattern. Some remains appear relatively complete, while others suggest that bones may have been moved, rearranged, or reburied after the body's initial decomposition. Such secondary burial practices are known from various prehistoric societies around the world and often reflect beliefs that death unfolded in stages rather than as a single event. Perhaps the dead were first laid elsewhere before selected bones were gathered into the cave. Or perhaps certain individuals were revisited by later generations who carefully rearranged ancestral remains during ceremonies now lost to history. The archaeological evidence cannot fully distinguish between these possibilities. It merely reveals that considerable care accompanied the treatment of the deceased. Artifacts found alongside the burials provide additional clues. Fragments of pottery, stone tools, shell ornaments, and other personal objects occasionally appear within the cave deposits. These items may have accompanied the dead as offerings, possessions, or symbolic gifts intended for whatever journey people believed followed earthly life. Yet their meanings remain uncertain. Did the objects belong to the individuals themselves? Were they placed there by grieving relatives? Or did they represent communal rituals repeated across generations? Without written records, archaeology must rely on patterns rather than explanations. One particularly fascinating aspect of the site concerns the cave environment itself. Unlike open-air cemeteries exposed to weather and erosion, caves create unusually stable conditions. Temperature, humidity, and protection from sunlight can preserve delicate remains that might otherwise disappear. This natural preservation allows researchers to reconstruct ancient diets through chemical analysis of bones, revealing heavy reliance on marine resources, freshwater fish, forest plants, and hunted animals. The results paint a picture of communities deeply connected to their surrounding environment. But they also raise another question. If these people depended so closely upon nature, did they view caves as part of that living relationship? Many later Japanese traditions regarded mountains, forests, waterfalls, and caves as places inhabited by spiritual forces. It would be inappropriate to project later beliefs directly onto Jomon communities separated by thousands of years. Even so, the continuity of sacred landscapes invites careful reflection. Could caves have represented thresholds between the visible world and an unseen one long before recorded history? Some archaeologists suggest practical explanations for the site's repeated use. Caves offered protection from scavenging animals. They provided clearly recognizable locations where generations could return to honor ancestors. Their stable environments naturally preserved remains. These reasons alone may account for their importance. Others believe practical concerns tell only part of the story. The effort required to carry bodies into secluded cave chambers suggests deliberate intention extending beyond convenience. Darkness itself may have possessed symbolic significance. Passing through a narrow entrance into the earth could have reflected beliefs about transition, renewal, or return. Such ideas remain impossible to verify. Yet, they continue to inspire thoughtful discussion. The cave's silence also invites another kind of mystery. Human voices once echoed through these chambers. Families may have gathered carrying torches, whose light flickered across limestone walls. Ceremonies may have unfolded where only dripping water and whispered prayers accompanied the farewell. No written testimony survives. No carvings explain what participants believed. Only bones, artifacts, and carefully chosen spaces remain. Some of the more speculative interpretations suggest that caves like Ipponmatsu formed part of broader ceremonial landscapes, extending beyond the burial site itself. Nearby forests, rivers, and mountains may all have participated in spiritual traditions that archaeology can scarcely detect. Perhaps the cave represented only one destination within a much larger ritual journey. Perhaps songs, dances, seasonal gatherings, or oral traditions once gave meaning to every burial performed here. If so, nearly all traces have vanished. Only fragments remain to hint at a far richer cultural world. Modern scientific techniques continue to reveal new details. Microscopic analysis identifies ancient diets. Radiocarbon dating refines chronological sequences. Studies of DNA and isotopes gradually illuminate family relationships and patterns of movement. Each advance answers one question while opening several more. Who exactly rested here? How were they connected? Why did this particular cave become so important over generations, while countless others remained unused? Standing at the entrance of Ipponmatsu Cave today, listening to wind moving gently through the surrounding trees, it becomes clear that the greatest mysteries are not always built from monumental stone or buried beneath vast cities. Sometimes they are preserved within quiet places where ordinary people entrusted their loved ones to darkness, believing that the cave held meaning beyond what words could express. Whether that meaning reflected practical necessity, ancestral devotion, spiritual belief, or traditions forever lost to time, the silent chambers of Ipponmatsu continue to guard their secrets, waiting for each new discovery to illuminate another small piece of a story that remains beautifully, and perhaps intentionally, incomplete. If the quiet darkness of Ipponmatsu Cave preserved intimate moments of remembrance, the next discovery reveals a very different relationship with death. Here, the silence belongs not to families honoring loved ones, but to an entire battlefield whose final chapter unfolded long after the fighting had ended. Hidden beneath the wetlands of northern Europe, thousands of scattered bones tell a story that remains as unsettling today as it was nearly 2,000 years ago. Mist drifts slowly across the wetlands of eastern Jutland in Denmark, softening the outlines of reeds and shallow pools that stretch toward the horizon. At dawn, the marsh seems almost timeless. Birds skim across still water, and the ground gently absorbs every sound. Few landscapes appear more peaceful. Yet, beneath this tranquil surface lies one of Europe's most haunting archaeological discoveries. The site is known as Alken Enge. Unlike castles, ruined cities, or monumental temples, there is almost nothing visible above ground to hint at its significance. The earth gives no obvious warning, but hidden beneath layers of peat and mud, archaeologists uncovered the fragmented remains of hundreds of ancient warriors, preserved by the wetlands for nearly 2,000 years. What began as isolated discoveries soon expanded into something far more extraordinary. Bone after bone emerged from the marsh. Skulls, arm bones, leg bones, pelvises, ribs. The remains did not belong to a small burial ground or a handful of unfortunate victims. They represented the aftermath of violence on a scale rarely documented in Northern Europe during the early Roman Iron Age. Radiocarbon dating places the event around the early 1st century AD, a time when the Roman Empire stood at the height of its power farther south, while Northern Europe remained home to numerous tribal societies whose histories were preserved primarily through archaeology rather than written records. The warriors themselves appear to have been overwhelmingly young adult men. Their skeletons preserve unmistakable signs of combat. Sharp force injuries mark many bones. Blunt trauma shattered others. Sword cuts, spear wounds, and crushing blows reveal the brutal reality of close-quarters fighting fought without the protections of later armor. Some injuries clearly occurred around the time of death. Others suggest desperate attempts to survive. The evidence leaves little doubt. A major battle had taken place. Yet the battlefield itself is not what makes Alken Enge so mysterious. The true puzzle begins after the fighting ended. Careful examination revealed that many bodies were not buried immediately. Instead, they appear to have remained exposed on the landscape for months, perhaps even close to a year. During that time, scavenging animals disturbed the corpses. Teeth marks left by wolves, foxes, and other carnivores appear on numerous bones, while natural weathering affected exposed skeletons before they were eventually gathered together. This sequence was unexpected. If these had simply been fallen warriors abandoned where they died, why were their remains later collected so carefully? Archaeologists noticed another remarkable pattern. The bones were not deposited randomly within the wetland. Instead, they appear to have been intentionally arranged. In one striking example, the pelvic bones of several individuals had been threaded onto a single wooden branch, creating an arrangement unlike anything expected from ordinary burial practices. Other bones seem to have been grouped according to deliberate choices rather than simple convenience. Someone returned. Someone collected the remains, and someone organized them with unmistakable intention. Why? One possibility is that the victors conducted a large-scale ritual following their triumph. Across prehistoric and early historic Northern Europe, wetlands often held special significance. Lakes, bogs, rivers, and marshes frequently received offerings ranging from weapons and jewelry to human remains. Such places may have been viewed as boundaries between the human world and supernatural realms, making them appropriate locations for ceremonies connected to warfare, sacrifice, or remembrance. In this interpretation, Alken Enge was not merely a place where bodies were discarded. It became a ceremonial landscape. The defeated warriors, after lying exposed to the elements, may have undergone a carefully staged ritual before their bones entered the marsh. But even this explanation raises difficult questions. Why leave the bodies exposed first? Was the delay practical, allowing flesh to decompose before the bones were collected? Or did exposure itself carry symbolic meaning? Some cultures viewed decomposition as an essential stage in the transition between life and death. Others believed that time, weather, or scavenging animals played important roles in spiritual transformation. Whether such beliefs existed here remains impossible to prove. Yet the sequence of events strongly suggests that what happened at Alken Enge followed customs understood by those who performed them. The scale of the discovery is equally remarkable. Current estimates suggest that the excavated bones may represent the remains of at least 82 individuals, but statistical analysis indicates that the original battlefield could have involved several hundred warriors, perhaps even more. For communities living in northern Europe during the early 1st century AD, such numbers would have represented an enormous military force. Who were these men? Were they members of neighboring tribes competing for territory, a coalition assembled under powerful leaders, or participants in conflicts shaped indirectly by political changes spreading outward from the expanding Roman world? The archaeological evidence offers only fragments. Weapons found nearby provide additional clues. Iron spearheads, shield fittings, and fragments of military equipment suggest experienced fighters rather than isolated raiders. Some artifacts indicate shared styles across wide regions, hinting that long-distance alliances or cultural connections may already have linked communities previously thought to be relatively isolated. Conflict, it seems, was organized. Leadership existed. Planning existed. The battle itself may have involved strategies far more sophisticated than once imagined. Scientific analysis has also revealed something deeply human beneath the violence. Many skeletons display healed injuries from earlier conflicts. These were not inexperienced youths encountering battle for the first time. Some had survived previous wars. Others carried evidence of physically demanding lives spent farming, hunting, and traveling before meeting their final confrontation. Each skeleton belonged to an individual with a family, friendships, memories, and expectations that vanished within a single campaign now almost entirely forgotten. Yet, one mystery continues to trouble researchers. No comparable settlement has yet been identified nearby that clearly explains the battle's location. Why fight here? Did the marsh occupy strategic ground controlling movement through the landscape? Or was the conflict drawn toward a place that already possessed ceremonial importance? Perhaps victory itself transformed an ordinary battlefield into sacred ground. Or perhaps the choice of location had always carried deeper meaning. The wetlands refuse to answer. Some of the more speculative interpretations venture further. A few scholars have wondered whether the careful manipulation of bones reflects complex beliefs about defeated enemies rather than simple disposal. Across many ancient societies, the treatment of enemy dead communicated messages extending beyond death itself. Rearranging remains could symbolize domination, purification, remembrance, or offerings to unseen powers. Without written testimony, motives remain uncertain. The evidence supports ritual. It does not reveal intention. Others have suggested that the remarkable preservation at Alken Enge offers only a rare glimpse of practices that may once have been widespread across northern Europe. Most battlefields disappear beneath agriculture, construction, or natural erosion. Wetlands, however, preserve what dry landscapes often erase. If that is true, how many similar sites have already vanished without leaving recognizable traces? Perhaps Alken Enge is exceptional, or perhaps it survived simply because nature protected what history nearly forgot. Modern technologies continue to deepen the investigation. DNA studies are beginning to explore relationships among the warriors. Isotope analysis examines where they grew up and whether they originated from multiple regions. Microscopic examination of injuries reconstructs the violence with extraordinary precision. Each new technique sharpens the picture, yet the central mystery remains surprisingly untouched. Standing beside the quiet marsh today, where reeds sway gently above water that once received the remains of hundreds of fallen men, it becomes difficult to reconcile the peaceful landscape with the events it conceals. Somewhere between battle and burial, ordinary death gave way to something far more deliberate, a sequence of actions whose meaning has echoed silently across nearly 2 millennia. Whether Enge preserves the memory of victory rituals, sacred ceremonies, political warnings, or beliefs now forever beyond our reach, the wetlands continue to guard their secrets beneath layers of peat and still water, reminding us that the greatest mysteries are sometimes written not in monuments or inscriptions, but in the careful arrangement of human bones left for future generations to discover. Yet the sequence of events strongly suggests that what happened at Enge followed customs understood by those who performed them. The scale of the discovery is equally remarkable. Current estimates suggest that the excavated bones may represent the remains of at least 82 individuals, but statistical analysis indicates that the original battlefield could have involved several hundred warriors, perhaps even more. For communities living in northern Europe during the early 1st century AD, such numbers would have represented an enormous military force. Who were these men? Were they members of neighboring tribes competing for territory, a coalition assembled under powerful leaders, or participants in conflicts shaped indirectly by political changes spreading outward from the expanding Roman world? The archaeological evidence offers only fragments. Weapons found nearby provide additional clues. Iron spearheads, shield fittings, and fragments of military equipment suggest experienced fighters rather than isolated raiders. Some artifacts indicate shared styles across wide regions, hinting that long-distance alliances or cultural connections may already have linked communities previously thought to be relatively isolated. Conflict, it seems, was organized. Leadership existed. Planning existed. The battle itself may have involved strategies far more sophisticated than once imagined. Scientific analysis has also revealed something deeply human beneath the violence. Many skeletons display healed injuries from earlier conflicts. These were not inexperienced youths encountering battle for the first time. Some had survived previous wars. Others carried evidence of physically demanding lives spent farming, hunting, and traveling before meeting their final confrontation. Each skeleton belonged to an individual with a family, friendships, memories, and expectations that vanished within a single campaign now almost entirely forgotten. Yet, one mystery continues to trouble researchers. No comparable settlement has yet been identified nearby that clearly explains the battle's location. Why fight here? Did the marsh occupy strategic ground controlling movement through the landscape? Or was the conflict drawn toward a place that already possessed ceremonial importance? Perhaps victory itself transformed an ordinary battlefield into sacred ground. Or perhaps the choice of location had always carried deeper meaning. The wetlands refuse to answer. Some of the more speculative interpretations venture further. A few scholars have wondered whether the careful manipulation of bones reflects complex beliefs about defeated enemies rather than simple disposal. Across many ancient societies, the treatment of enemy dead communicated messages extending beyond death itself. Rearranging remains could symbolize domination, purification, remembrance, or offerings to unseen powers. Without written testimony, motives remain uncertain. The evidence supports ritual. It does not reveal intention. Others have suggested that the remarkable preservation at Enge offers only a rare glimpse of practices that may once have been widespread across northern Europe. Most battlefields disappear beneath agriculture, construction, or natural erosion. Wetlands, however, preserve what dry landscapes often erase. If that is true, how many similar sites have already vanished without leaving recognizable traces? Perhaps Enge is exceptional, Or perhaps it survived simply because nature protected what history nearly forgot. Modern technologies continue to deepen the investigation. DNA studies are beginning to explore relationships among the warriors. Isotope analysis examines where they grew up and whether they originated from multiple regions. Microscopic examination of injuries reconstructs the violence with extraordinary precision. Each new technique sharpens the picture. Yet, the central mystery remains surprisingly untouched. Standing beside the quiet marsh today, where reeds sway gently above water that once received the remains of hundreds of fallen men, it becomes difficult to reconcile the peaceful landscape with the events it conceals. Somewhere between battle and burial, ordinary death gave way to something far more deliberate, a sequence of actions whose meaning has echoed silently across nearly 2 millennia. Whether Alken Enge preserves the memory of victory rituals, sacred ceremonies, political warnings, or beliefs now forever beyond our reach, the wetlands continue to guard their secrets beneath layers of peat and still water, reminding us that the greatest mysteries are sometimes written not in monuments or inscriptions, but in the careful arrangement of human bones left for future generations to discover. If the wetlands of Alken Enge preserved the silent aftermath of conflict, the next discovery carries us far from northern marshes to the brilliant waters of the Aegean Sea. Here, the mystery is not one of war or forgotten kingdoms, but of deliberate acts repeated over generations, rituals so unusual that they continue to challenge nearly every assumption archaeologists once held about Europe's earliest island societies. The island of Keros rises from the deep blue waters of the Cyclades, its rocky hills shaped by wind, salt, and countless centuries beneath the Mediterranean sun. Unlike larger neighboring islands, Keros has no great rivers or fertile plains. Its landscape feels stark and almost timeless, where pale stone cliffs meet quiet coves and the sea stretches endlessly toward the horizon. From a distance, nothing immediately suggests that this small island once held extraordinary importance. There are no towering temples, no massive palaces, no city walls dominating the skyline. Instead, one remote headland overlooking the sea has revealed a mystery unlike almost any other in prehistoric archaeology. Scattered beneath the soil were thousands of broken marble figurines, fragmented stone vessels, and carefully deposited artifacts dating to the early Bronze Age, around 2800 to 2300 BC. At first, the discovery seemed disappointing. Many of the elegant Cycladic marble figurines, famous for their simple, graceful human forms, were incomplete. Heads were separated from torsos. Arms had vanished. Legs ended abruptly, where clean breaks interrupted the polished stone. For years, scholars assumed looters or natural damage had shattered these remarkable objects. But careful excavation slowly revealed a very different story. The fractures themselves appeared ancient. Even more surprising, many broken edges showed signs of wear before burial, suggesting the objects had remained exposed for some time after being intentionally broken. This raised an extraordinary possibility. The figurines were not destroyed by accident. They may have been broken deliberately. The mystery deepened as researchers studied where the fragments originated. The marble used to create many figurines came from neighboring Cycladic islands, rather than Keros itself. Detailed analysis demonstrated that numerous broken pieces deposited on Keros matched styles, and sometimes even fragments, known from settlements many miles away across the Aegean. This was no local collection. Objects had been transported over open water. But why carry damaged sculptures across the sea instead of complete ones? The answer remains one of archaeology's most fascinating unanswered questions. Excavations at the site known as the Kavos deposit uncovered astonishing quantities of fragmented marble objects, unlike anything previously documented from this period. Alongside figurines appeared beautifully crafted marble bowls, cups, and ceremonial vessels, many broken according to similarly deliberate patterns. The deposits did not resemble ordinary rubbish, nor did they resemble graves. They occupied a category entirely their own. It seemed as though generations of people had traveled to this isolated island for the specific purpose of leaving behind carefully fragmented objects. The implications were profound. By the early Bronze Age, communities scattered across the Cyclades already possessed sophisticated seafaring abilities. Traveling regularly between islands required considerable knowledge of navigation, seasonal weather, currents, and boat construction. The journeys themselves may have carried meaning. Perhaps reaching Keros formed part of a larger ceremonial experience. Perhaps the voyage mattered as much as the destination. Nearby, archaeologists uncovered another remarkable site on the tiny islet of Daskalio, connected to Keros in antiquity by a narrow land bridge or shallow crossing. Excavations revealed extensive terracing, carefully engineered stone architecture, drainage systems, workshops, and evidence of large-scale construction that transformed the naturally steep hill into what appears almost like an artificial pyramid rising from the sea. The scale of labor required was astonishing. Thousands of tons of stone had been transported and arranged with remarkable precision. For communities living more than 4,000 years ago, such an undertaking demanded organization, planning, and cooperation, extending well beyond individual villages. Suddenly, Keros no longer appeared to be an isolated ritual site. It became part of a much larger ceremonial landscape. The relationship between the ritual deposits at Kavos and the monumental activity at nearby Daskalio continues to intrigue archaeologists. Did pilgrims gather here during seasonal festivals? Did religious specialists oversee ceremonies involving communities from multiple islands? As our journey continues from ceremonial islands and forgotten ritual landscapes, we arrive at a discovery of an entirely different kind. This time, the mystery is not built from monumental architecture or carefully broken artifacts, but from a single grave hidden within the entrance of an ancient cave. Sometimes, one carefully placed burial can reveal more about the human heart than an entire lost city. Along Kenya's southeastern coast, dense tropical forests gradually give way to rugged limestone hills carved by countless seasons of rain. Hidden among these cliffs lies Panga ya Saidi, a vast cave overlooking a landscape alive with birdsong, towering trees, and shifting shafts of sunlight. From the entrance, the view stretches across forests that have sustained human communities for tens of thousands of years. The cave itself feels timeless. Its cool interior shelters layers of sediment quietly accumulating over immense stretches of history. Every handful of earth contains fragments of forgotten lives, stone tools, animal bones, charcoal from ancient fires, and traces of generations who returned here again and again. Unlike many archaeological sites defined by a single civilization, Panga ya Saidi preserves an unusually continuous record of human occupation spanning nearly 80,000 years. People arrived. People departed. Climates changed. Animals disappeared. Technologies evolved. Yet the cave remained, patiently recording one chapter after another beneath its floor. Among those countless layers, archaeologists uncovered one discovery that immediately stood apart. Buried with remarkable care was the skeleton of a young child, approximately 2.5 to 3 years old, dating to around 78,000 years ago. The burial quickly became known by the affectionate nickname Mtoto, meaning child in Swahili. Its significance reaches far beyond the individual who rests there. This is currently regarded as the oldest known intentional human burial discovered in Africa. The realization transformed what initially appeared to be a simple grave into one of the continent's most profound archaeological discoveries. Careful excavation revealed extraordinary details. The child had been placed inside a deliberately excavated pit rather than left where death occurred naturally. The body rested in a tightly flexed position, with knees drawn toward the chest. The head appeared to have been supported, possibly by a pillow or organic material placed beneath it, although the supporting object itself had long since disappeared. Such subtle observations emerged only through painstaking analysis. Tiny shifts in the bones, the angle of the neck, the collapse of surrounding sediment. Together, they suggested that someone had carefully arranged the child's final resting place. This was not an accidental deposition, nor was it a hurried disposal. It reflected intention, perhaps even tenderness. The burial raises one of archaeology's most enduring questions. At what point did humans begin expressing grief in ways recognizable today? Death is universal. Burial is not. Choosing to dig a grave, position a body with care, and perhaps return to remember the deceased reveals thoughts extending beyond immediate survival. It hints at memory, attachment, possibly even beliefs about existence after death. Yet exactly what those beliefs were remains impossible to know. No written words accompany the grave. No carved symbols explain its meaning. Only silent evidence remains. The child was buried during the Middle Stone Age, a period when Homo sapiens already possessed sophisticated stone technologies and occupied diverse environments across Africa. Increasingly, archaeological discoveries from this era reveal populations capable of remarkable adaptability, long-distance movement, and complex social behavior. Panga Saidi fits naturally within this broader picture. The cave preserves evidence of changing technologies through time, reflecting how successive generations adapted to shifting climates and ecosystems without abandoning the shelter altogether. Its location proved remarkably resilient. When surrounding environments became wetter or drier, forests expanded or contracted, and coastlines shifted, people continued returning. The cave offered continuity within an ever-changing world. Yet, among thousands of ordinary traces left by countless visitors, only one burial of this kind has been identified. Why? Was burying the dead exceptionally rare, or have similar graves simply escaped discovery? Organic evidence disappears easily across tens of thousands of years. Countless ancient burials may have vanished completely, leaving no recognizable trace for modern archaeologists. Alternatively, perhaps this child held particular importance. Could age itself have shaped the community's response? The death of a young child often carries profound emotional weight across human societies. Perhaps extraordinary care reflected extraordinary loss. Some researchers have proposed that the careful positioning of the body demonstrates an emotional sophistication fully consistent with modern human behavior. The possible support beneath the head has attracted particular attention. If the interpretation is correct, someone may have intentionally cushioned the child's face before covering the grave. It is a remarkably intimate gesture, not one driven by practical necessity, but perhaps by affection, or ritual, or both. Other scholars urge caution. Organic materials such as leaves, woven mats, animal skins, or wooden supports rarely survive over such immense timescales. Reconstructing their presence depends upon subtle patterns in bone movement and sediment collapse. Alternative explanations remain possible. Yet, even under the most conservative interpretations, the burial clearly reflects deliberate human action. The broader archaeological context deepens the mystery. Panga Saidi contains evidence spanning enormous stretches of time, allowing researchers to observe gradual cultural change rather than isolated moments. Stone tools evolved. Animal remains reflect changing diets. Beads made from marine shells appear much later, suggesting expanding symbolic behavior and growing social complexity. The burial sits near the beginning of this long narrative. It reminds us that emotional expression may have deep roots reaching far beyond the appearance of elaborate art or monumental architecture. Perhaps compassion left traces long before cities. The cave itself contributes another layer of significance. Across many cultures, separated by geography and time, caves have become places associated with origins, ancestors, protection, and transition. They shelter life while also descending into darkness beyond ordinary daylight. Whether the people of Panga Saidi viewed the cave in similar ways cannot be established. Yet, choosing its interior as a burial place may not have been accidental. Did the cave represent safety? A return to the earth? A place where generations remained close together? Or simply familiar ground where loved ones could be remembered? The evidence remains silent. Scientific investigation continues to reveal remarkable details. Microscopic analysis reconstructed how the body decomposed. Three-dimensional imaging preserved fragile bone positions before excavation. Careful sediment studies identified the grave's boundaries despite the passage of nearly 80,000 years. Modern technology has allowed researchers to observe gestures so delicate that they would otherwise have disappeared forever. Each advance brings us closer to understanding the burial. Yet the central mystery remains unchanged. Who mourned this child? A mother? A father? Grandparents? An entire community? How long did they remain beside the grave before returning to daily life? Did they speak words now forever lost? Did they leave flowers, branches, or personal objects made from materials that vanished thousands of years ago? Such questions belong to a part of human history where archaeology reaches its limits. Some of the more speculative interpretations explore whether this burial reflects spiritual beliefs already taking shape among early Homo sapiens. If intentional burials express concepts extending beyond physical death, then symbolic thought may have developed earlier and more gradually than once believed. Others argue that love alone requires no formal religion. Care for the dead may arise naturally from emotional bonds without implying structured spiritual systems. Both perspectives acknowledge the same remarkable evidence. A child was not abandoned. The child was cared for, even in death. Standing inside Panga Saidi today, where soft light filters through the cave entrance and ancient sediments continue to conceal untold stories, it becomes impossible not to feel the quiet humanity preserved beneath the ground. Long before kingdoms, writing, or monuments transformed the world, someone paused here to perform an act of remembrance so gentle that its meaning still resonates across nearly 80,000 years. Whether that burial marked the beginning of enduring funerary traditions, reflected beliefs forever beyond our understanding, or simply expressed the timeless bond between people and those they loved, Panga Saidi reminds us that some of archaeology's greatest mysteries are not about how ancient humans built their world, but about how they learned to say goodbye. If the quiet burial at Panga Saidi revealed that compassion may reach back to the earliest chapters of our story, the next discovery presents a far more unsettling mystery. Here, remembrance seems intertwined with sacrifice, destruction, and deliberate farewell. Hidden beneath an unassuming mound in western Spain, archaeologists uncovered a scene so carefully preserved that it appears almost frozen in the final moments of a civilization's disappearing world. Across the fertile plains of Extremadura, fields of wheat and wild grasses ripple beneath an endless sky. The Guadiana River winds slowly through the countryside, nourishing a landscape that has supported human communities for thousands of years. To passing travelers, the low rise, known as Casas del Turuñuelo, appears little different from countless other ancient mounds scattered across the Iberian Peninsula. Yet, beneath its quiet surface lies one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries ever made in prehistoric Spain. Excavations revealed an exceptionally well-preserved building dating to the 5th century BC, associated with the enigmatic Tartessian culture, a civilization whose wealth, artistry, and sudden disappearance have puzzled historians for generations. Unlike many ancient settlements gradually abandoned to time, Casas del Turuñuelo tells a story of remarkable intention. Its walls remain standing to an unusual height. Its carefully constructed staircases descend into chambers that appear almost untouched. Rooms still preserve traces of daily activity, interrupted by a sequence of events unlike anything archaeologists expected to find. The building was not simply abandoned, it was deliberately sealed. Before its doors were closed forever, those responsible filled rooms with earth, collapsed parts of the structure in controlled ways, and effectively entombed the entire complex beneath layers of soil. It was an act of preservation through destruction. But why? The mystery deepened dramatically during excavations in 2017. Within one section of the building, archaeologists uncovered the remains of more than 50 animals, including horses, cattle, pigs, and dogs. The sheer number immediately stood out, but even more striking was their condition. Many appeared to have been intentionally sacrificed. The horses attracted particular attention. Beautifully preserved skeletons lay side by side, some still wearing elements of harnesses or bridles. Analysis suggested that many had been healthy at the time of death, making their sacrifice all the more significant. Throughout much of the ancient Mediterranean world, horses represented prestige, wealth, military power, and status. To sacrifice even one healthy horse required an extraordinary decision. To sacrifice dozens suggested an event of immense cultural importance. The discoveries transformed Casas del Turuñuelo into one of Europe's largest known Iron Age animal sacrifice sites. Yet the purpose of the ceremony remains uncertain. The Tartessian civilization itself occupies a curious place in history. Classical Greek writers described Tartessos as a prosperous land, rich in metals, trade, and skilled craftsmanship somewhere in the far west of the known world. Its merchants exchanged goods with Phoenician traders, while its wealth became legendary among ancient authors. Then, almost as suddenly as it appeared in historical tradition, Tartessos faded from view. Its cities declined. Its political structures disappeared. Its memory dissolved into legend. Casas del Turuñuelo belongs to this mysterious final chapter. The building itself displays impressive architectural sophistication. Large mud brick walls rest upon carefully prepared stone foundations. The complex includes courtyards, storage areas, ceremonial spaces, and what many researchers interpret as elite administrative or religious rooms. One particularly remarkable feature is its monumental staircase. Unlike many staircases from comparable sites, this one survives in exceptional condition, descending elegantly between substantial walls as though waiting for its builders to return. Every detail suggests careful planning. Nothing about the structure appears temporary, which makes its deliberate burial all the more puzzling. Why invest enormous effort constructing such an impressive complex only to intentionally destroy and conceal it? Several explanations have emerged. One possibility connects the sacrifices and sealing of the building to a carefully organized ritual marking the site's permanent closure. Across many ancient cultures, important buildings underwent ceremonial decommissioning when their purpose came to an end. Offerings accompanied abandonment, transforming practical departure into sacred transition. Perhaps Casas del Turuñuelo followed such traditions. If so, the sacrificed animals may have formed part of an elaborate farewell ceremony, whose symbolism has largely vanished. Others suggest a darker context. The 5th century BC witnessed significant political and economic changes across the Western Mediterranean. Phoenician influence declined following the fall of Tyre and shifting regional powers. Trade networks transformed. Old alliances weakened. Could external pressures have forced the Tartessian elite to abandon important ceremonial centers? Did ritual closure reflect crisis rather than celebration? The archaeological evidence allows both possibilities. Among the remarkable discoveries are finely crafted imported objects reflecting extensive international connections. Fragments of Greek ceramics appear alongside Phoenician goods and locally produced luxury items. Ivory carvings, metalwork, and beautifully decorated pottery reveal a society deeply integrated into long-distance exchange networks. Casas del Turuñuelo was no isolated provincial settlement. It belonged to a sophisticated world where ideas, technologies, religions, and artistic traditions crossed seas alongside merchants and sailors. Yet, despite these connections, the building's final chapter remains uniquely enigmatic. Recent discoveries have added another extraordinary dimension. Excavations uncovered finely carved stone reliefs depicting human faces, among the earliest known anthropomorphic sculptures associated with Tartessian culture. For many years, scholars believed Tartessian religious traditions avoided human representation, emphasizing symbolic or abstract imagery instead. The reliefs challenged that assumption. Who did these faces portray? Gods, priests, elite rulers, ancestors? Their calm expressions survive, but their identities remain hidden. Like so much else at the site, they answer one question only by raising several more. Scientific analysis of the sacrificed animals has also produced intriguing results. Many horses appear carefully selected according to age and physical condition. Their deaths occurred within a relatively narrow period, suggesting coordinated planning rather than gradual accumulation. This was no ordinary disposal. It was a single, extraordinary event. Some researchers have compared the scale of the sacrifices with major religious ceremonies documented elsewhere in the ancient Mediterranean. Others caution against direct comparisons, emphasizing that Tartessian traditions possess distinctive local characteristics that remain only partially understood. Without written records describing the ceremony, interpretation remains necessarily cautious. More speculative theories occasionally emerge as well. A few observers have wondered whether the deliberate burial of the building reflected an attempt to protect something rather than merely abandon it. By sealing the structure beneath earth, its builders inadvertently preserved architecture, artifacts, and evidence that might otherwise have disappeared entirely. Were they hiding sacred objects from approaching enemies, protecting a holy place from desecration, or preserving memory for future generations they believed might someday return? There is no direct evidence supporting such ideas. Yet, the extraordinary care taken during the building's closure continues to invite thoughtful speculation. The site also reminds archaeologists how incomplete the archaeological record often remains. Only a portion of Casas del Turuñuelo has been excavated. Large sections still lie beneath the surrounding landscape. Every excavation season reveals new rooms, additional artifacts, and fresh surprises that reshape previous interpretations. The story is still unfolding. Standing within the preserved halls today, where sunlight falls across ancient staircases and silent chambers once echoed with ceremonies now impossible to reconstruct, it becomes clear that Casas del Turuñuelo is more than the remains of a single building. It is a rare moment frozen at the edge of profound cultural transformation, capturing the final acts of people who chose not simply to leave their sacred place behind, but to bury it with extraordinary care. Whether those sacrifices honored forgotten gods, marked the end of a civilization, responded to political upheaval, or fulfilled rituals whose meanings have been lost forever. The sealed chambers of Casas del Turuñuelo continue to remind us that history's greatest mysteries are sometimes preserved not by accident, but by the deliberate hands of those who wished certain stories to disappear beneath the earth, waiting patiently until someone, centuries later, uncovered them once again. If the carefully sealed halls of Casas del Turuñuelo remind us that entire ceremonial centers can disappear beneath the earth, the next discovery carries us across the Atlantic to another sacred landscape, where architecture, astronomy, and ritual appear woven together with remarkable precision. Here, the mystery is not why a sanctuary was buried, but why its builders aligned stone, sky, and ceremony so carefully that its true purpose is still being debated centuries later. Across the rolling highlands of central Mexico, golden grasses sway beneath an immense sky, broken only by clusters of mesquite trees and distant volcanic peaks fading into the horizon. At first glance, the landscape seems peaceful, almost empty. Yet, rising from these quiet hills are broad stone platforms and carefully constructed terraces that silently overlook the surrounding valleys. This is Cañada de la Virgen. Unlike the towering pyramids that attract millions of visitors elsewhere in Mexico, this ceremonial complex remained hidden for centuries beneath layers of soil and vegetation. Local communities knew of unusual mounds scattered across the hills, but only systematic archaeological investigations revealed that they concealed one of the region's most sophisticated ceremonial centers. Its builders remain partly mysterious. The site is generally associated with the Otomi people, although evidence suggests it may also have been influenced by neighboring cultures during the Epiclassic and early post-classic periods, roughly between AD 600 and 1050. It occupied an important position within a landscape where trade, pilgrimage, agriculture, and religious traditions intersected. Yet, from the very beginning, Cañada de la Virgen appears to have been designed with something greater than ordinary settlement in mind. The architecture immediately commands attention. Large stone platforms support ceremonial buildings, arranged with striking geometric precision. Broad staircases rise toward elevated plazas, while carefully constructed walls define spaces that seem intended to guide movement rather than simply enclose it. Nothing feels accidental. Every structure appears positioned according to a larger plan. As archaeologists mapped the site more carefully, another remarkable pattern emerged. Several buildings display precise astronomical alignments. During particular times of the year, especially around solstices and equinoxes, sunlight enters specific architectural spaces at carefully calculated angles. Shadows fall across staircases in predictable ways. Certain sightlines appear intentionally directed toward prominent mountain peaks or celestial events visible on the horizon. The effect is subtle. There are no mechanical devices, no inscriptions explaining the calculations. Only stone, sunlight, and extraordinary precision. For the people who built Cañada de la Virgen, the movement of the heavens was not merely something to observe. It was something to build with. This discovery transformed the site's interpretation. Rather than functioning solely as a religious center, the complex may also have served as an astronomical observatory, a ceremonial calendar, or a place where political authority became inseparable from knowledge of the cosmos. Throughout ancient Mesoamerica, careful observation of celestial cycles shaped agriculture, ritual, and governance. Knowing when seasonal rains would likely arrive, or when important ceremonies should occur, could influence the survival of entire communities. But Cañada de la Virgen suggests something even more profound. Its builders did not simply record the sky, they integrated it into architecture itself. Walking through the complex may have become an experience synchronized with the movements of the sun and stars. One of the site's principal structures, often referred to as the House of the 13 Heavens, has attracted particular attention. Its name reflects interpretations connecting the building with Mesoamerican cosmology, where multiple layers of heaven formed part of a richly developed spiritual universe. Although modern names are assigned by researchers, the building's layout strongly suggests ceremonial significance extending beyond practical administration. Burials discovered within portions of the complex deepen the mystery. Archaeologists uncovered carefully interred individuals accompanied by offerings including finely crafted pottery, ornaments, shells, and other valuable objects. These were not casual burials. Each appears to have followed established ritual practices. Who were these individuals? Religious leaders? Elite rulers? Astronomer priests responsible for interpreting celestial events? Or respected members of a community whose identities disappeared long before written records reached the region? The answers remain uncertain. Analysis of the grave goods reveals extensive connections reaching well beyond the immediate valley. Marine shells traveled inland from distant coastlines. Obsidian arrived from volcanic regions many miles away. Exotic materials demonstrate participation in broad exchange networks linking diverse cultures across central Mexico. Ideas likely traveled alongside these goods. Religious traditions, architectural knowledge, astronomical observations, perhaps even myths explaining humanity's place within the universe. The builders of Cañada de la Virgen were clearly not isolated. They belonged to a sophisticated intellectual landscape where observation of nature held profound cultural significance. Yet, despite growing archaeological knowledge, many aspects of the site remain difficult to explain. Why was this particular hill selected? Nearby landscapes offered numerous possible locations for settlement. Instead, the builders chose elevated ground with carefully framed views of surrounding mountains and celestial horizons. Was geography itself sacred? Did nearby peaks serve as landmarks within religious ceremonies? Or did the landscape preserve stories now completely forgotten? Architecture alone cannot answer. The site's relationship with water adds another intriguing dimension. Seasonal rains transformed the surrounding valleys, making water management essential for survival. Some researchers believe ceremonial activities performed at Cañada de la Virgen may have been closely connected with fertility, agriculture, and appeals for rainfall. Across many ancient cultures, astronomy and agriculture became inseparable. Tracking the heavens meant understanding the rhythms of life itself. Perhaps ceremonies conducted here marked seasonal transitions upon which entire harvests depended. Others suggest a more political interpretation. Knowledge of celestial cycles may have strengthened elite authority. If religious leaders accurately predicted significant astronomical events, they could reinforce their position within society by demonstrating apparent harmony between human leadership and cosmic order. Such ideas remain plausible, yet direct evidence remains elusive. No surviving texts explain the intentions of those who planned the complex. Only architecture continues to speak. Some of the site's most fascinating mysteries emerge from its periods of occupation and abandonment. Evidence suggests that Cañada de la Virgen flourished for several centuries before eventually being deserted. The reasons remain uncertain. Environmental change, shifting trade routes, political instability, conflict, or changing religious traditions have all been proposed. Perhaps several factors combined gradually. Unlike cities destroyed in dramatic catastrophes, ceremonial centers often fade quietly as beliefs evolve and populations relocate. Yet abandonment does not erase meaning. Long after ceremonies ceased, the structures continued watching the skies exactly as they had been designed to do. Each solstice, each equinox, each passing season. The architecture still performs its silent dialogue with the heavens. Some of the more speculative interpretations venture beyond conventional archaeology. Because of the remarkable astronomical precision displayed at the site, a few observers have suggested that Cañada de la Virgen preserves knowledge inherited from far older traditions whose origins remain obscure. Others imagine the complex as part of an extensive ceremonial network connecting sacred landscapes across Mesoamerica through shared observations of the sky. Current archaeological evidence neither confirms nor entirely excludes such possibilities. Much remains unknown. Large portions of the surrounding region have yet to be explored in comparable detail. Every excavation uncovers additional artifacts. Every new survey refines understanding of architectural alignments. Each discovery brings researchers closer to understanding the complex, while simultaneously revealing new layers of uncertainty. Standing atop the highest platform today, watching sunlight slowly move across ancient stone as distant mountains frame the horizon, it becomes difficult to separate architecture from astronomy or ritual from landscape. The builders of Cañada de la Virgen created more than ceremonial buildings. They constructed a place where earth and sky appeared deliberately connected, allowing the passage of time itself to become part of the monument. Whether this remarkable complex served as a sacred calendar, an astronomical sanctuary, a center of political authority, or a meeting place where human lives were measured against the movements of the cosmos, it continues to remind us that some of history's greatest mysteries are written not only in stone, but also in light, shadow, and the silent rhythms of the heavens that ancient observers understood far better than we may ever fully know. As one mystery slowly fades into the distance, another emerges from an unexpected shoreline, one so quiet and unassuming that, at first glance, it seems impossible that it could challenge everything we thought we knew about humanity's distant past. Along the ancient edge of a freshwater lake in what is now Palestine, layers of mud, reeds, and time concealed a forgotten settlement for thousands of years. It waited beneath the earth with extraordinary patience, preserving moments so delicate that they seemed almost impossible to survive. This place is known as Ohalo too, and despite its modest appearance, it remains one of archaeology's most remarkable and quietly mysterious discoveries. The landscape itself offers little warning of what lies beneath. Gentle waters stretch toward the horizon, reflecting changing skies just as they have for countless generations. Seasonal grasses sway in the wind. Birds gather along the shoreline. The environment feels timeless, peaceful, almost untouched. Yet, beneath these calm surroundings rests evidence of people who lived here nearly 23,000 years ago, during one of the coldest periods of the last ice age. That date alone makes Ohalo too extraordinary. For decades, archaeologists believed that complex settlements emerged only after humans adopted agriculture around 12,000 years ago. Permanent villages, organized living spaces, sophisticated food preparation, these belonged to farming societies, not wandering hunter-gatherers. Humanity's story appeared neatly arranged into stages. First mobility, then farming, then villages, then civilization. Ohalo, too, refuses to fit comfortably into that sequence. Discovered after changing lake levels exposed the ancient site, Ohalo, too, preserved something almost unheard of in prehistoric archaeology. Instead of scattered stone tools and broken bones, researchers uncovered entire brush huts, fireplaces, grinding stones, plant remains, woven fibers, and countless fragile organic materials that normally disappear long before archaeologists ever arrive. The preservation was astonishing. Because the settlement had eventually become submerged beneath lake sediments, oxygen was largely excluded. Without exposure to air, many materials escape the decay that destroys nearly every other prehistoric campsite. It was almost as though the lake itself had quietly sealed away an ancient moment, waiting for someone thousands of years later to uncover it. Walking through the excavated remains is unlike visiting many prehistoric sites. Rather than isolated artifacts displayed without context, Ohalo too offers something closer to a frozen community. Individual huts can still be identified. Hearths remain where fires once burned. Food preparation areas appear surprisingly organized. Even tiny seeds remain scattered across ancient floors where they had fallen over 20 millennia earlier. It feels strangely immediate. Instead of imagining anonymous prehistoric figures moving through abstract landscapes, visitors can almost picture individuals sitting beside fires, repairing tools, preparing meals, or watching children play along the lakeshore. That intimacy raises an unexpected question. If people 23,000 years ago lived in such carefully arranged settlements, how much of humanity's social complexity has simply vanished without leaving traces elsewhere? Most archaeological sites from this period preserve almost nothing beyond durable stone artifacts. Organic materials decay rapidly. Wooden structures collapse. Plant fibers disappear. Clothing van-ravels. Entire ways of life dissolve into silence. Perhaps Ohalo too is exceptional. Or perhaps it is simply fortunate. Some archaeologists suggest that similar settlements once existed across large portions of the ancient world, but disappeared completely because they lacked the rare preservation conditions found beside this lakeshore. If that possibility is correct, then our understanding of prehistoric life may be based less on what actually existed, and more on what happened to survive. Among Ohalo II's greatest surprises were its dwellings. Researchers identified several oval-shaped brush huts constructed from branches and grasses. Although simple in appearance, they demonstrate planning, material selection, and repeated maintenance. These were not random windbreaks assembled overnight. Their construction suggests knowledge accumulated over generations. The huts also appear arranged rather than scattered. Their placement hints at shared space, perhaps reflecting social organization within the community. Who decided where each shelter should stand? Was there leadership? Did families occupy particular locations year after year? Or was the arrangement guided by traditions that have long since disappeared? The archaeological evidence cannot answer these questions directly, yet it quietly encourages them. Nearby fireplaces provide additional clues. Ash layers indicate repeated use rather than isolated cooking events. Burned wood fragments reveal deliberate fuel selection. Stone tools lie where they were discarded or left behind. Nothing appears chaotic. Instead, there is an impression of routine. Daily life unfolded according to recognizable rhythms, despite taking place during one of the harshest climatic periods humanity had ever experienced. This raises another fascinating mystery. How did these people thrive during the last glacial maximum? The world around them was dramatically different. Vast ice sheets covered enormous portions of the northern hemisphere. Temperatures were considerably lower. Rainfall patterns shifted. Resources changed with the seasons. Yet Ohalo II's inhabitants not only survived, they appeared remarkably adaptable. Evidence suggests they exploited an extraordinary range of food sources: fish from the lake, water birds, large mammals, small game, wild fruits, nuts, countless edible plants. Rather than relying heavily upon a single resource, they practiced an impressively flexible strategy that modern researchers increasingly recognize as one of humanity's greatest evolutionary strengths. Perhaps diversity itself became their greatest tool, but it is the plant remains that continue to fascinate researchers most deeply. More than 100 species of wild plants have been identified at Ohalo too. This alone is remarkable. Even more intriguing is the apparent selection involved. The inhabitants did not simply gather random vegetation. They repeatedly collected specific grasses and seeds, many of which required careful harvesting and processing before consumption. Grinding stones discovered within the settlement show signs of prolonged use. Some researchers argue that these people possessed surprisingly detailed botanical knowledge. They understood seasonal cycles. They recognized edible varieties. They processed grains long before agriculture officially began. That final point has sparked years of discussion. Among the preserved remains were wild barley and other cereals. Some grains even display characteristics suggesting they were harvested while still green, perhaps to maximize nutritional value or prevent loss from natural scattering. Does this represent simple gathering, or something approaching cultivation? Mainstream archaeology generally favors caution. Most researchers conclude that Ohalo II's inhabitants remained hunter-gatherers rather than farmers. There is little evidence that they deliberately planted crops or permanently altered landscapes for agriculture. Yet others wonder whether the boundary between gathering and farming may not have been as sharp as once believed. Could experimentation with wild cereals have begun thousands of years before true agriculture emerged? Might generations of observation, harvesting, and seed management gradually have laid the foundation for later farming societies? If so, then agriculture may not have appeared suddenly after the Ice Age. Instead, it may have developed through countless small innovations stretching back far deeper into prehistory. Ohalo II offers tantalizing hints, but not definitive answers. The mystery grows even deeper when examining the site's extraordinary collection of microscopic evidence. Tiny fibers reveal cord-making techniques. Plant impressions suggest woven materials. Possible fragments of twisted rope demonstrate an understanding of technologies rarely preserved from such ancient periods. These discoveries expand our picture of prehistoric intelligence. Stone tools alone once defined this era. Now, archaeologists recognize a much richer technological world composed largely of perishable materials. Wood, fiber, leather, basketry, textiles. Entire technological traditions may have existed almost invisibly because time erased their physical remains everywhere except rare sites like Ohalo II. How advanced were these forgotten crafts? How many innovations vanished forever simply because they were made from organic materials? We may never know. The lake also yielded thousands of fish bones. Analysis suggests year-round fishing rather than seasonal visits alone. This observation has generated another intriguing debate. If people occupied Ohalo II across multiple seasons, was it truly a temporary camp? Or did it represent something closer to a permanent settlement? Traditional definitions of hunter-gatherer mobility become increasingly difficult to apply. Perhaps these communities moved less frequently than previously assumed. Perhaps some groups established long-term homes while still depending entirely upon wild resources. If that were true, then the origins of settled life might extend much farther into humanity's past than conventional timelines suggest. The evidence remains open to interpretation. Animal remains contribute additional layers of complexity. Researchers recovered bones from gazelles, deer, foxes, hares, birds, tortoises, and numerous fish species. Each reflects careful butchering and resource management. Nothing appears wasted. This efficiency speaks not merely of survival but of accumulated ecological knowledge. These people understood their environment intimately. They knew migration patterns, plant cycles, fishing seasons, weather changes, lake behavior. Such knowledge cannot be acquired quickly. It develops across generations living closely with a landscape. One of the most fascinating discoveries involved flower remains. Microscopic analysis identified flowering plants that may have been brought intentionally into certain huts. Their purpose remains uncertain. Were they practical, medicinal, accidental, decorative, or did they possess symbolic meaning? Modern observers naturally associate flowers with beauty, ritual, or remembrance. Projecting those meanings backward carries obvious risks, yet the possibility remains difficult to dismiss entirely. Could these Ice Age communities have appreciated aesthetics in ways rarely visible archaeologically? Were certain plants valued beyond their nutritional usefulness? No one can answer with confidence. Another remarkable find consisted of charred seeds from numerous species growing together. Some researchers interpret this as evidence of deliberate food preparation. Others suggest accidental burning during everyday activities. Still others wonder whether particular mixtures served medicinal or ceremonial functions now impossible to reconstruct. Ancient meals leave surprisingly complicated evidence. Even when ingredients survive, recipes do not. Cooking techniques disappear. Flavor combinations vanish. Cultural meanings evaporate. Archaeologists recover ingredients, but rarely intentions. One particularly intriguing aspect of Ohalo II lies not within what was discovered, but within what remains absent. Despite extraordinary preservation, no written language existed. No monuments rose above the landscape. No carved kings announced victories. No temples dominated the shoreline. The settlement belongs to an age before history became history. Everything we know emerges through indirect evidence. Footprints of behavior. Silent objects. Burned wood. Discarded bones. Fallen seeds. Every interpretation remains tentative because no voice survives to explain what these people believed about themselves. Did they tell stories beneath the stars? Did they possess myths explaining the lake? Did they mark seasons through ceremonies now completely forgotten? Human imagination undoubtedly flourished long before writing, yet almost none of it survives. This silence has encouraged more speculative interpretations over the years. Some fringe writers have suggested that Ohalo II demonstrates the existence of an unexpectedly advanced Ice Age civilization, whose achievements have largely vanished. Others argue that sophisticated knowledge must have spread through prehistoric populations much earlier than traditionally believed. A few even connect the settlement to broader hypotheses, proposing forgotten cultures destroyed by dramatic climatic events at the end of the Ice Age. Such ideas attract considerable public interest. Mainstream archaeology, however, urges restraint. The remarkable sophistication visible at Ohalo II does not necessarily require lost civilizations or vanished empires. Instead, it may simply reveal that ancient hunter-gatherers were far more intelligent, organized, and adaptable than earlier generations of researchers assumed. That conclusion alone is profound. Sometimes the greatest mystery is not hidden technology, it is hidden capability. Perhaps we underestimated prehistoric humanity because only fragments of their lives survived elsewhere. Perhaps Ohalo II corrects that misunderstanding. Or perhaps it merely opens still larger questions. Climate change eventually transformed the region. Lake levels shifted. Habitats changed. Communities adapted or moved elsewhere. Ohalo II disappeared beneath rising waters, preserved in silence while thousands of years passed overhead. Empires would rise, languages would evolve, religions would emerge, cities would dominate landscapes. Yet, beneath layers of mud, this tiny lakeside settlement remained almost untouched, carrying fragile memories across unimaginable spans of time. Even today, researchers continue analyzing materials recovered from the site using increasingly sophisticated scientific techniques. If the submerged homes of Ohalo II revealed how fragile traces of ordinary life can survive for tens of thousands of years, the next discovery takes us to a landscape where survival itself demanded extraordinary resilience. Here, far beyond forests and fertile valleys, an ancient sanctuary emerged at the very edge of the Arctic world, a place where ritual, sacrifice, and seasonal gathering appear to have unfolded beneath endless skies and shimmering curtains of northern light. Far above the forests of northern Eurasia, where the Ob River widens before meeting the Arctic Ocean, the landscape stretches into an immense expanse of tundra and wetlands. During winter, snow blankets the earth for months beneath a sky that glows with pale blue light. In summer, the frozen ground softens just enough to awaken mosses, grasses, and countless migrating birds. The horizon seems limitless, interrupted only by winding rivers and distant clusters of dwarf birch. It is a landscape that appears almost untouched by history. Yet, beneath these frozen soils lies one of the Arctic's most remarkable archaeological mysteries. The site is known as Polui. Situated near the modern city of Salikard in northwestern Siberia, Russia, this ancient sanctuary occupied a strategic position close to the Arctic Circle nearly 2,000 years ago. At first glance, it seems an unlikely place for ceremonial life. Temperatures plunged far below freezing for much of the year, while seasonal darkness and powerful winds shaped every aspect of survival. And yet, people returned here repeatedly, not merely to hunt, not simply to travel, but apparently to perform rituals whose meaning continues to puzzle archaeologists today. The sanctuary dates primarily between the 3rd century BC and the 2nd century AD, a period when northern Eurasia remained home to highly adaptable communities whose lives revolved around rivers, reindeer, fishing, and seasonal migration. Unlike the great empires rising farther south, these Arctic societies left no written chronicles describing their beliefs. Instead, they left objects, bones, tools, offerings, fragments of ceremonies frozen into the permafrost. Excavations have uncovered an astonishing variety of artifacts: carved antler objects, bone harpoons, iron knives, bronze ornaments, wooden implements, beautifully crafted decorative pieces displaying remarkable artistic skill despite the harshness of the surrounding environment. Many appear to have served practical purposes. Others seem unmistakably symbolic. Together, they reveal communities possessing sophisticated craftsmanship and extensive cultural traditions that once flourished far beyond the boundaries usually associated with ancient civilizations. Yet, the site's greatest mystery lies not in its artifacts alone. It lies in the extraordinary concentration of animal remains. Thousands upon thousands of bones have been recovered from Polui. Among them, reindeer dominate the assemblage. Entire skulls, antlers, mandibles, vertebrae. Carefully deposited skeletal elements accumulated over generations. At first glance, archaeologists considered the possibility that the site represented nothing more than an ordinary butchering location used by hunters processing seasonal kills. Closer examination gradually challenged that interpretation. The bones were not discarded randomly. Patterns began to emerge. Certain body parts appeared far more frequently than others. Some skulls had been intentionally modified. Specific areas contained concentrated deposits unlike ordinary food waste. It became increasingly clear that practical hunting alone could not explain everything. Reindeer occupied the very center of Arctic life. They provided meat, hides, bone, antler, sinew, transport, clothing, and tools. Entire cultures developed around understanding their migrations across the tundra. For many northern peoples, reindeer were more than valuable animals. They formed the foundation of existence itself. If rituals took place at Polui, it is hardly surprising that reindeer stood at their heart. But exactly what those rituals involved remains elusive. One particularly fascinating discovery concerns carefully arranged antlers. Rather than appearing only as discarded hunting remains, some antlers seem intentionally placed within ceremonial contexts. Others display cut marks suggesting deliberate modification before deposition. Across numerous northern cultures documented in more recent centuries, antlers carried symbolic associations connected with renewal, fertility, seasonal cycles, and communication with spiritual forces. Could similar beliefs already have existed here 2,000 years ago? The archaeological evidence cannot provide certainty. Yet, the careful treatment of these remains strongly suggests meanings extending beyond simple utility. Human remains have also contributed to the mystery. Although relatively rare compared with animal bones, several discoveries indicate that people themselves participated in ceremonies whose precise nature remains difficult to reconstruct. Fragments of human skulls have been recovered from the site, some showing evidence of modification after death. This immediately raises uncomfortable questions. Were these ancestors honored through ritual display? Enemies treated according to ceremonial traditions? Or individuals whose remains played specific roles within Arctic spiritual practices? Without written testimony, the answers remain frustratingly out of reach. The sanctuary's location itself appears carefully chosen. It occupies a position overlooking important river systems that connected enormous regions of northern Siberia. Rivers functioned as highways long before roads existed, carrying people, goods, and ideas across astonishing distances. Seasonal gatherings may have brought different communities together at Polui. Hunters, fishermen, craft specialists, spiritual leaders, families following migratory routes. Perhaps the sanctuary became a meeting place where practical exchange blended seamlessly with religious ceremony. Artifacts recovered from the site hint at surprisingly extensive connections. Bronze objects likely originated far beyond the immediate region. Certain decorative styles resemble traditions found hundreds of miles away. Iron tools demonstrate participation in exchange networks linking Arctic communities with cultures much farther south. Far from existing in complete isolation, Polui occupied an important position within broader systems of communication extending across northern Eurasia. Ideas traveled, materials traveled, beliefs may have traveled as well. Among the site's most remarkable finds are finely carved figurines fashioned from bone and antler. Some depict animals with extraordinary realism. Others combine human and animal characteristics in ways that immediately invite speculation. Were these representations of mythological beings, protective spirits, shamans undergoing transformation, or simply artistic expressions inspired by the surrounding wildlife? Many later indigenous Arctic traditions describe spiritual worlds where boundaries between humans and animals become fluid during dreams, ceremonies, or shamanic journeys. It would be inappropriate to assume direct continuity across 2 millennia. Even so, the imagery encourages thoughtful comparison. Perhaps symbolic transformation formed part of belief systems already developing during this earlier period. Another intriguing feature involves evidence for repeated seasonal use. Rather than permanent year-round occupation, archaeological layers suggest that people gathered here during particular times before dispersing once again across the Arctic landscape. Why gather seasonally? The answer may lie in the rhythms of the natural world. Reindeer migrations occurred predictably. Fish runs followed seasonal cycles. Bird populations arrived and departed according to ancient ecological patterns. Communities living within these environments understood time through movement rather than calendars. Perhaps ceremonies mark the return of migrating herds. Perhaps successful hunts required ritual preparation. Perhaps annual gatherings renewed social relationships alongside spiritual obligations. The sanctuary appears deeply intertwined with these recurring natural cycles. Fireplaces discovered across the site reveal repeated episodes of activity separated by intervals of abandonment. Ash layers accumulated gradually. Tools were repaired, meals prepared, offerings deposited. Then silence returned until another season brought people back once more. For centuries, perhaps generations beyond counting, this pattern repeated. Each visit added another layer to the sanctuary's history. The Arctic environment itself played an extraordinary role in preserving the evidence. Permafrost protected wood, leather fragments, plant remains, and delicate organic materials that would normally decay rapidly elsewhere. These rare conditions allow archaeologists to reconstruct aspects of daily life almost invisible at comparable sites farther south. Wooden handles still preserve tool shapes. Antler carvings retain remarkably fine detail. Even microscopic residues survive upon certain artifacts. Nature itself became an archivist, yet preservation introduces its own mysteries. How much remains hidden beneath permanently frozen ground? Climate change has begun altering Arctic landscapes at unprecedented rates. As permafrost thaws, archaeological sites face increasing risks from erosion and decomposition. Some discoveries emerge only because frozen ground melts. Others may disappear forever before archaeologists can document them. Polui reminds us that history is not only buried, sometimes it is melting. Scientific investigations continue revealing astonishing details. Stable isotope analysis reconstructs ancient diets dominated by fish and reindeer. Microscopic examination identifies manufacturing techniques used by skilled artisans. DNA studies explore relationships among animal populations, and occasionally human remains. Every new method adds depth to the story, yet every answer seems accompanied by fresh uncertainty. One particularly curious aspect concerns the apparent absence of ordinary domestic life. Although people undoubtedly ate, rested, and worked while visiting the sanctuary, evidence suggests that ceremonial activities dominated the site's primary purpose. This was not simply another village. Something distinguished it. Something encouraged repeated journeys across immense Arctic landscapes despite the enormous effort required. What made this place sacred? Was it the river? The surrounding tundra? An unusually successful hunting ground? A location where generations believed communication with unseen forces became easier? The landscape itself offers no obvious explanation. Some researchers propose that Polui functioned as a major regional ceremonial center, serving multiple communities dispersed across vast territories. Rather than belonging to one settlement, it may have belonged to an entire cultural landscape united through seasonal gatherings. Others suggest a more specialized role. Perhaps only particular individuals, shamans, ritual leaders, or respected elders, performed ceremonies here while broader communities remained nearby. The archaeological evidence accommodates both possibilities. Speculative interpretations naturally follow. Because the sanctuary preserves unusual combinations of human remains, animal offerings, symbolic carvings, and carefully structured deposits, some observers have imagined elaborate cosmologies centered upon communication between human and animal worlds. Others wonder whether astronomical events visible beneath Arctic skies, long winter nights illuminated by the aurora borealis, dramatic seasonal changes in daylight, or the cyclical return of the sun itself, held profound ceremonial significance. The northern lights, dancing silently across frozen skies, have inspired countless beliefs throughout history. Did visitors to Polui watch those shimmering curtains while performing rituals now forever forgotten? No archaeological evidence can answer. Yet the question lingers naturally. Equally fascinating is the site's relationship with sound. Modern visitors often describe the Arctic as profoundly quiet, but beneath that apparent silence lies constant movement. Wind across frozen ground, flowing rivers, migrating birds, reindeer herds crossing distant valleys, cracking ice. The sanctuary would have existed within this immense natural soundscape. Ceremonies performed here may have unfolded without walls, enclosed temples, or monumental architecture. Instead, the tundra itself became the sacred enclosure. The sky formed the ceiling. The river carried every echo away. Standing at Polui today, surrounded by endless northern horizons where earth, water, and sky merge almost seamlessly, it becomes easier to understand why ancient communities may have recognized something extraordinary in this place. Monumental buildings were unnecessary. The landscape itself possessed overwhelming presence. It asked for attention, for patience, for observation, for respect. Whether Polui served as an Arctic pilgrimage center, a sanctuary honoring the spirits of migrating animals, a gathering place for scattered communities, or a ceremonial landscape whose true meaning has long since faded into silence, it continues to challenge modern assumptions about the ancient North. Far from existing at the margins of human history, the people who gathered here created complex traditions shaped by remarkable environmental knowledge, artistic expression, and spiritual imagination. Beneath frozen ground, surrounded by rivers that have flowed unchanged for thousands of years, the sanctuary still guards its unanswered questions. Every carved antler, every carefully placed skull, every weathered fireplace whispers that the Arctic was never an empty frontier. It was a living world filled with stories, ceremonies, and beliefs whose echoes remain preserved in ice, waiting for future discoveries to reveal how much of that forgotten world still lies hidden beneath the tundra. As the echoes of one forgotten world slowly fade, another begins to emerge. Not beneath the sea or buried under drifting sands, but hidden below the streets of an ancient Roman city. Beneath layers of collapsed stone and centuries of silence lies a network of tunnels that few people expected to find. Their walls are rough, their passages surprisingly deliberate, and their purpose remains one of the more intriguing questions in the archaeology of ancient Italy. These are the underground tunnels of Fregellae, a city whose destruction was recorded in history, yet whose deepest secrets remained concealed beneath the earth for more than 2,000 years. At first glance, the landscape offers little indication of what lies below. Rolling hills stretch across central Italy, interrupted by fields and scattered trees. Birds circle overhead, while the nearby Leary River continues its slow journey through the countryside, just as it did during the days of the Roman Republic. The ruins above ground appear modest. Stone foundations, fragments of roads, traces of once busy neighborhoods. They seem to tell a familiar story of an ancient settlement gradually reclaimed by nature. Yet beneath these ruins is another city entirely. Dark passageways cut through the earth with surprising precision. Narrow corridors twist beneath former houses and public buildings. Some sections remain just large enough for a person to move through, while others widen unexpectedly before narrowing again into darkness. Unlike natural caves, these spaces reveal unmistakable signs of deliberate construction. Who built them? More importantly, why? Fregellae itself occupies a fascinating place in Roman history. Founded as a Latin colony in the 4th century BC, It became one of Rome's most loyal allies during periods of rapid expansion across the Italian peninsula. Its location was strategically important, controlling movement between northern and southern regions while serving as a thriving commercial center. For generations, prosperity followed. Merchants traveled its roads. Farmers cultivated fertile lands. Roman influence expanded steadily outward. The city appeared destined for a long future. Instead, everything changed in 125 BC. According to ancient historical accounts, Fregellae rebelled against Rome after growing frustration over political rights and citizenship. The revolt was brief. Roman forces responded quickly. The city was captured. Then, according to historical sources, it was destroyed so completely that it served as a warning to others who might challenge Roman authority. Its streets fell silent. Buildings collapsed. The population scattered. History seemed to end there. Or so it appeared. Modern archaeological excavations have revealed a far more complicated picture. As researchers carefully uncovered neighborhoods buried beneath centuries of soil, they encountered something unexpected beneath the foundations of several buildings. Underground tunnels. Not isolated chambers, not ordinary storage cellars, but carefully planned passageways extending beneath portions of the city itself. Their discovery immediately raised questions that still remain only partially answered. Were these simply practical engineering works? Did they serve military purposes? Were they escape routes prepared during times of danger? Or do they represent something far less obvious? The tunnels vary in size and construction. Some are relatively straight, while others change direction abruptly. Their ceilings often show evidence of careful excavation through compact earth and softer stone. In several places, builders reinforced weak sections using masonry techniques familiar to Roman engineers. The workmanship suggests planning rather than improvisation. These were not hurried excavations created during a single emergency. Whoever designed them understood both the landscape above and the ground below. One of the earliest explanations proposed by archaeologists focused on drainage. Ancient cities frequently struggled with groundwater and seasonal flooding. Underground channels could help redirect water away from important structures while protecting foundations from erosion. Certainly, parts of the tunnel network resembled drainage systems, yet other sections seem unnecessarily complex for that purpose alone. Some passages rise and fall unexpectedly. Others connect locations where water management appears unlikely to have been the primary concern. If drainage explains part of the system, it may not explain all of it. Another interpretation suggests military planning. Fregellae occupied an important frontier during periods of conflict, and Roman military engineering was famous for combining practicality with innovation. Secret underground routes could allow defenders to move unnoticed beneath threatened areas of the city. Supplies might be transported. Messengers could avoid enemy observation. Critical positions might remain connected even during siege conditions. Such ideas are certainly plausible. History contains numerous examples of underground military passages. Yet, evidence at Fregellae remains incomplete. No weapons caches have been found within the tunnels themselves. No inscriptions identify their purpose. No surviving ancient writer explicitly mentions their existence. Instead, the archaeological evidence must speak on its own. Its voice remains quiet. Some researchers believe portions of the network functioned as service corridors associated with workshops and industries operating within the city. Fregellae was economically active. Craft production required storage, movement of materials, and specialized infrastructure. Underground spaces could provide naturally cool environments ideal for preserving goods or reducing exposure during transport. Again, the theory fits certain sections remarkably well, but not every corridor. Some routes seem too narrow for practical movement of large quantities of materials. Others terminate unexpectedly without obvious destinations. These inconsistencies continue to invite new interpretations. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies in the apparent relationship between the tunnels and private homes. Excavations suggest that several residential buildings possess direct access to underground passages. This raises intriguing possibilities. Did wealthy families commission hidden routes beneath their properties? Were these intended for emergencies? Did they provide discrete movement between different parts of the city? Or were they simply integrated into everyday urban planning in ways no longer immediately recognizable? Modern assumptions may not always align with ancient realities. What appears mysterious today may once have been entirely ordinary. Conversely, features that seem practical to us may have carried symbolic or ceremonial meanings now lost to history. The absence of written explanations leaves considerable room for interpretation. Roman engineering itself contributes another layer of fascination. The Republic possessed remarkable technical capabilities. Aqueducts crossed valleys. Roads connected distant provinces. Bridges survived centuries. Mining operations reached extraordinary depths. Constructing underground passageways would certainly have fallen within Roman abilities. Yet, the decision to invest labor in hidden infrastructure suggests that builders expected meaningful benefits. Every tunnel represented countless hours of excavation. Every reinforced wall required skilled craftsmanship. Every passage reflected careful planning. People rarely undertake such efforts without compelling reasons. The destruction of Fregellae adds still another dimension. Historical accounts describe the city's dramatic end, but archaeology paints a more nuanced picture. Not every building burned simultaneously. Not every structure collapsed immediately. Life appears to have continued briefly in certain areas before final abandonment. Could the tunnels have played a role during those final days? Some archaeologists cautiously suggest they may have served as escape routes for fleeing inhabitants. Families might have attempted to avoid advancing Roman forces by moving beneath the streets. Others could have hidden valuable possessions underground, hoping to recover them after the crisis passed. Few likely imagined that centuries would pass before anyone entered those corridors again. Unfortunately, direct evidence remains elusive. No dramatic caches of treasure have emerged from the tunnels. No mass gatherings of refugees have been identified. Instead, archaeology reveals fragments, broken pottery, collapsed walls, scattered objects. Enough to inspire possibilities, but rarely enough to confirm them. This uncertainty has naturally encouraged more imaginative theories over time. Some fringe writers have proposed that the tunnels formed part of an extensive secret network extending well beyond Fregellae itself, connecting distant settlements across the region through hidden underground routes. Such ideas are undeniably intriguing. Ancient civilizations certainly constructed long tunnels for mining, water supply, and transportation under specific circumstances. However, no archaeological evidence currently supports the existence of an enormous interconnected subterranean system stretching beneath central Italy. Existing excavations indicate localized networks rather than continent-spanning labyrinths. Even so, unanswered questions remain. Could additional sections still await discovery? Absolutely. Large portions of ancient Fregellae remain unexcavated. Every archaeological season uncovers new information, while simultaneously revealing how much still lies hidden beneath the soil. Another speculative interpretation focuses less on practical engineering and more on secrecy. Throughout history, underground spaces have often been associated with restricted activities. Private meetings, political conspiracies, religious ceremonies, storage of sensitive documents, protection of valuable objects. Might certain tunnels have provided discrete locations beyond the view of ordinary citizens? Roman society contained numerous religious traditions, some public, others more private. Mystery cults gradually spread throughout the Roman world, often emphasizing initiation rituals known only to members. Could any portion of the underground network have supported ceremonies hidden from public observation? At present, no direct evidence confirms such a connection. No ritual objects uniquely associated with underground worship have been recovered from the passages. No inscriptions identify sacred functions. Yet, archaeology frequently reminds us that absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. Organic materials decay, objects are removed, walls collapse. Entire chapters of history disappear before excavation ever begins. The tunnels also encourage broader questions about how ancient cities functioned. Modern visitors naturally focus upon streets, forums, marketplaces, and temples. These visible structures define our mental image of Roman urban life. But what if important aspects of daily activity occurred beneath the surface? Perhaps underground infrastructure played larger roles than historians once appreciated. Storage, maintenance, movement, security, water management, emergency planning. Much of a city's true complexity may have remained hidden even from many of its own inhabitants. Excavating below ground presents unique challenges. Collapsed sediments fill ancient spaces. Roots penetrate weakened ceilings. Water gradually reshapes abandoned corridors. Each excavation proceeds slowly, often revealing only small sections before stabilization becomes necessary. As a result, archaeologists rarely uncover an entire underground system at once. Instead, understanding develops piece by piece. A short corridor discovered one year, a connecting chamber several seasons later, another entrance decades afterward. The map evolves gradually. So too does interpretation. Modern technology has begun transforming these investigations. Ground-penetrating radar, three-dimensional mapping, laser scanning, digital reconstruction. Each method allows researchers to visualize hidden architecture without immediately disturbing fragile archaeological deposits. Sometimes these surveys identify previously unknown voids beneath excavated areas. Other times they reveal that apparently isolated passages actually connect through still buried sections. Every new image raises fresh questions. How extensive was the original network? How many entrances remain undiscovered? Were some deliberately sealed before the city's destruction? Or have later geological processes simply concealed them beneath layers of earth? The relationship between the tunnels and Roman politics is equally intriguing. Fregellae's rebellion reflected growing tensions surrounding citizenship and representation within the expanding republic. Political dissatisfaction simmered long before open revolt erupted. If secret meetings occurred, discreet underground locations would certainly have provided privacy away from public scrutiny. Could political discussions have unfolded beneath the city while ordinary life continued overhead? The idea is difficult to prove, equally difficult to dismiss entirely. History often unfolds in hidden rooms long before becoming visible in public squares. Perhaps the tunnels witnessed conversations that ultimately shaped the city's fate. Perhaps they merely carried water beneath peaceful neighborhoods. Both possibilities remain compatible with available evidence. One of archaeology's greatest strengths lies in its willingness to embrace uncertainty. Rather than forcing definitive answers where evidence remains incomplete, careful researchers often preserve multiple possibilities simultaneously. Fregellae exemplifies this approach. The tunnels clearly existed. Their construction required planning. Their builders possessed impressive technical knowledge. Beyond those facts, much becomes interpretation. and interpretation evolves as new discoveries emerge. Standing within one of these narrow corridors today, surrounded by compact earth and ancient masonry, the silence feels almost tangible. Footsteps echo softly against rough walls. Light disappears quickly around distant bends. The air remains noticeably cooler than the sunlit ruins above. It is remarkably easy to imagine generations of people moving through these same passages with purposes known only to themselves.